Chapter 941, Choice. As night descended upon the Woolworth building, the events of the previous evening lingered like a shadow over Makusa. A dark wizard had brazenly infiltrated the building, slain employees, and absconded with Atticus Blaine's wand, leaving the security measures of the institution in tatters. Fortunately, the re-election of Chairman Samuel Quahog had captivated the American wizarding world, drawing the attention of reporters and effectively burying the scandal. Tonight, the building's security was palpably heightened. Aurors and hastily recruited enforcers patrolled the hundreds of floors within the Capitol, their presence a testament to the urgency of the situation. "I'm going to remind you again, Graves." The routine department head meeting had concluded, and as the door swung open, the cold, oppressive atmosphere of the conference room spilled out. Miss Marcel White from the International Magical Cooperation Department was the first to storm out. Her frosty demeanor was a clear indication that the exchange had been anything but pleasant. Marcel halted abruptly outside the door, turning sharply to face Graves, who remained seated at the conference table. His expression was grim, his eyes unwavering. "If Mr. Blaine withdraws his cooperation with us due to your insolent behavior," she declared icily, "I will not hesitate to impeach you in Parliament for abusing your power. Furthermore, Mr. Blaine is the Deputy Director of the International Federation of Wizards. Your foolish actions against him could very well become an international scandal, tarnishing our reputation among our peers. This is something Chairman Quahog will not tolerate." Without waiting for a response, Marcel pivoted on her heels and departed, leaving the conference room's atmosphere as heavy as lead. The other department heads, though outwardly stoic, harbored a mix of surprise and schadenfreude in their eyes. Typically, issues at their level were resolved through diplomacy and negotiation, but Marcel's direct confrontation suggested that Graves' reckless conduct had pushed her to the brink. Despite the formidable influence of the Graves family in American magical politics, and Graves himself being a central figure of power, it was clear that his current predicament was dire. No one wished to associate with him now, as his downfall seemed imminent. The sound of chairs scraping against the floor lingered briefly. Once alone in the conference room, Graves clenched his fists on the table, his eyes burning with a fierce intensity that made his dark red pupils seem to glow. Yet, his expression soon turned despondent as he rose and left the room. The flickering firelight in the fireplace cast shadows on Graves's rigid face, making him appear both like a weary old man and a demon thirsting for blood. He walked towards his desk with steady yet slightly faltering steps. In the upper right corner of the desk lay the morning's edition of the New York Ghost. On its front page, an elderly wizard with short, silvery hair and eyes brimming with youthful energy smiled and waved at a cheering crowd. Graves glanced at it briefly before turning his attention to a report in front of him. The Murder of Chago Piorio, an analysis of the possibility of Atticus Blaine's involvement. This report, presumably completed by his subordinates during the meeting, caught his eye. As he read the title, a flicker of interest crossed his otherwise dull expression. Atticus Blaine was alive, and his eyes reflected a sense of urgency. He strode to his seat in just a few steps, grabbed the report, and began skimming through it. The general details and outcomes of the entire arrest operation were not his primary concern. In fact, the analysis conclusions of the report held little importance to him. Graves flipped through more than a dozen pages until he found what he was looking for, the list of Atticus Blaine's belongings. Graves caught sight of these words, and his index finger traced the hastily written list, moving down to the bottom. When he saw one party, Kular item, his eyes lit up with intensity, and he nearly jabbed the paper with his finger. Really, how could Blaine have this thing? Graves muttered in disbelief, confusion flickering across his square, solemn face. His lips moved silently as he tried to comprehend. Clutching the analysis report tightly, Graves's eyes were a whirlwind of emotions: excitement, contemplation, hesitation, and finally, all these emotions coalesced into determination. He tossed the report onto the table, adjusted his expression in the reflection of the window glass, and, regaining his usual composure, turned to walk towards the fireplace. Yet, as he took a step forward, he hesitated once more. This pause was brief. After glancing at Quahog's face on the table, his resolve returned, and he strode purposefully towards the fireplace. He grabbed a handful of flue powder and tossed it into the embers. In the ensuing green glow, Graves called out clearly, "Detention room," and stepped into the flames, vanishing from sight. The city's vibrant neon lights softened the dense night. Despite the late hour, nearly every high-rise building was still aglow. The Muggles toiled tirelessly within the steel giants they had constructed, striving for their livelihoods and societal progress. Their relentless efforts lent an urgency to the cool night air. "This is truly remarkable. I've never been to New York, and I didn't expect it to be so extraordinary," Sirius exclaimed, his awe barely concealed as he surveyed the scene. "You don't see so many tall buildings in London. The Muggles here are incredible." The constant travel between continents had left Amelia's slender face looking weary. The frequent and long-distance apparition had pushed her endurance to its limits. While Sirius marveled at the city's grandeur, the surrounding lights and shadows swirled before Amelia's eyes, growing more intense until, "Oh!" Sirius, quick to react, caught Amelia as she nearly collapsed. Concern etched his features as he asked, "What happened to you?" "Thanks," Amelia replied, taking a few deep breaths as the breeze cooled her cheeks. She nodded gratefully to Sirius. "I'm just a bit tired. It's no big deal. Mr. Black, let's go see Atticus. He lives in the building ahead." Sirius admired the resilience of the young woman beside him. However, after glancing at Fox on his shoulder, he couldn't shake a sense of unease and asked, "Since it's right in front of us, why don't we just apparate into Atticus's room?" Amelia brushed her hair back, and under the neon lights, her pale face revealed a gentle beauty, different from her usual cold demeanor, causing Sirius's heart to skip a beat. "We don't know the situation, Mr. Black," Amelia explained. "His room, or the area around it, is likely under surveillance by Aurors. If we suddenly appeared there, it would be difficult to explain. I can visit Atticus because Graves hasn't revoked the transfer of regulatory orders he assigned to me, but—" Amelia's eyes flickered as she looked at Sirius. "Mr. Dumbledore, you mentioned you can make yourself invisible. If it's the disillusionment charm, I'm not sure it will be effective against the Aurors keeping watch nearby unless you're exceptionally skilled," someone remarked. Atticus Blaine responded with a knowing smile. "Ah, the disillusionment charm? Yes, I can use it, though I wouldn't claim to be a master. However," he paused, tilting his head with a mischievous glint in his eyes, "I have a better method than that." End of this chapter. Chapter 942. Opportunity for Atonement. After some time spent in conversation, Amelia finally managed to convince the hotel security staff that the animal accompanying her was a large, gentle dog, not a black bear that had escaped from the zoo. However, the sheer size of the dog still left the handsome male waiter uneasy. "If you insist on taking it upstairs, ma'am, I must accompany you for your safety and the safety of the other guests," the waiter said firmly. Amelia glanced at Sirius with a hint of sadness. Sirius, who had confidently assured her that everything would go smoothly outside the hotel, now seemed less certain. He lowered his head, staring at the bright red velvet carpet with a touch of embarrassment. "All right," Amelia sighed, acknowledging the reasonable request of the non-magical waiter. The elevator strained to carry 2 people and an overweight dog to the upper floor. With a crisp ding, the elevator doors opened, and Sirius eagerly rushed out. The no-mage waiter, acting quickly, grabbed Sirius's tail, causing him to stumble to the ground. "Hey!" Amelia quickly stopped the overly excited black dog and nodded apologetically to the waiter. "Sorry, he's been cooped up for too long and might be a bit overexcited." The good-natured waiter didn't mind. He stood up, adjusted his tilted hat, and said, "Oh, you don't have to apologize, ma'am. Just make sure your dog doesn't bite. Please, this way." As if understanding he shouldn't cause trouble, Sirius resisted the urge to run and stayed close to Amelia. Late at night, the corridor was empty except for Amelia, the no-mage waiter, and the heavy footsteps of the black dog. They were heading towards Atticus Blaine's room when suddenly, click, the door of the room they had just passed opened, and a wizard with upturned eyebrows stepped out. As the door swung open, Amelia recognized several familiar faces inside. "Amelia?" Ariel exclaimed in surprise. "What are you doing here?" "The mission Mr. Graves assigned me isn't over yet, is it?" Amelia replied, her expression unreadable, unfazed by the presence of her colleagues. Oh, that's true, Ariel said, frowning. He eyed the grinning dog beside Amelia suspiciously. You've started keeping pets, Amelia? I assume this dog doesn't have any special bloodline, right? In front of the nomage, Ariel softened his tone, wanting to confirm whether the large, intimidating dog had any magical lineage. After you all rudely barged into my house, my parents decided we needed some extra security measures, so they asked me to get this dog from the nomage pet market. I assume that's not a crime, is it? Of course not, Ariel replied, a bit embarrassed and surprised by Amelia's sharper tone. After a moment's hesitation, he shrugged and retreated into the room. They belong to the security department. They're aurors, Amelia explained to Sirius. The nomage waiter, not understanding her words, raised his eyebrows in surprise. After such a long walk, I assume you haven't had dinner yet, Amelia continued. As the door opened, Sirius rushed into the room, where Atticus Blaine sat behind a desk, calmly reading a book. He looked up with a serene smile and nodded to the waiter. Please prepare some food for us. The Muggle waiter bowed and, after confirming that the large black dog showed no signs of aggression, closed the door. With a sigh, the image of the big black dog shimmered and transformed into Sirius in the dim light. You don't seem too surprised to see me, Atticus, Sirius remarked as he strode over, embracing Atticus Blaine, who had emerged from behind the desk. After scrutinizing Atticus's composed expression, Sirius grinned with satisfaction. Well, I was momentarily taken aback when I sensed your and Fox's magical presence in the hotel, Atticus admitted with a quiet smile. But by the time you reached the upper floors, I had already pieced it together. Perhaps Remus sent a message to Headmaster Dumbledore, and you're here on his behalf? Ah, nothing escapes you, Sirius chuckled. He glanced around, noting the array of expensive Muggle brands on the wine rack. He stepped over, retrieved a bottle of whiskey, poured himself a generous glass, and downed it in one swift motion. Wiping his mouth, he sighed contentedly. What happened? A remarkable young witch rushed to Hogwarts and gave us a general overview. Dumbledore mentioned you might have a handle on the situation, but do you know who took your wand? Hold on a moment, Atticus began, intending to share his thoughts. However, he paused, frowning as he turned to Amelia, who stood silently by the door. Did you go to Hogwarts yourself? Yes, the girl replied, suddenly as reserved as when they first met. She avoided Atticus's gaze, focusing instead on the carpet. Remus thought it was crucial to inform Mr. Dumbledore about your situation immediately. He didn't fully trust the goblins, so he asked me to go. Atticus studied Amelia, whose eyes continued to evade his, and fell silent. The room was steeped in an awkward tension. So, you already know everything? Atticus sighed after a moment. Amelia was startled by his words. She shook her head instinctively, but when her eyes met Atticus's, deep as the night sky, she couldn't lie. Finally, she bit her lip and nodded almost imperceptibly. My parents mentioned it to me, she admitted hesitantly. Yet, an inexplicable sadness welled up within her, compelling her to voice her doubts. Why did you hide all this? You must have guessed when you first met me, didn't you? Her clear eyes widened, fists clenched tightly, and her slender shoulders trembled slightly. Yet there was a determination in her gaze that moved Atticus. You knew we were family, so why pretend otherwise? Sirius choked on his drink, covering his mouth to stifle his cough, his eyes wide with shock at the unfolding confrontation. I didn't want to deceive you, Amelia, Atticus confessed, not concealing his weariness. He rubbed his temples and spoke calmly. At the immigration office, after seeing your face and hearing your surname, I had a rough idea of your identity. Even in Sansia, I couldn't completely quell my curiosity about you. I wanted to learn more about your situation. Atticus met Amelia's intense gaze, feeling as though this young girl possessed a sharper insight than Dumbledore himself. But I didn't want to disrupt your lives. That's completely selfish, Amelia exclaimed, her anger at Atticus's secrecy giving her unexpected courage. She rushed toward him, her demeanor more like that of an elder scolding a wayward child. We're family, aren't we? You should be with us, Atticus. Why do you think you'd disrupt our lives? Breathing heavily, tears welled in her eyes. Belina, my sister, and my parents have always cherished the photo album with her. They've always regretted what happened back then, regretted not accepting her again, and not accepting you. Did you really think there wasn't even a chance for forgiveness? Your sins? Don't you want to hand them over? End of this chapter. Chapter 9 and 43, Conspiracy. Perhaps you've misunderstood me, Amelia. Atticus Blaine sighed heavily, facing Amelia, whose emotions were spiraling out of control. Everything that happened back then, whether right or wrong, is in the past. Holding on to hatred is foolish. I don't harbor resentment because your parents abandoned my mother. Your family leads a happy and joyful life, and my interference would only disrupt your peace, which is not my intention. Moreover, you must be aware that the British wizarding community is currently facing a significant challenge. The return of Voldemort has once again cast the shadow of war over the wizards living in that land. If you know anything about Voldemort, you should understand his cruel nature. Once our relationship becomes public, it will undoubtedly spell disaster for you and your parents. The mention of Voldemort left Amelia stunned. She hadn't given much thought to the dark wizard that Albus Dumbledore had warned about. The chaos Voldemort caused in Britain over a decade ago hadn't spread to other countries. To most magical communities, he was merely a figure from history books. Amelia, well-read and possessing a strong memory, had come across some accounts of the dark wizard known as the Mysterious Man by the British wizards. If the records were true, she knew that her family would undoubtedly stand at the forefront of resisting the dark wizard. Given Voldemort's past actions, it was impossible for him to ignore their family. Sirius stood at the bar, holding an empty glass, watching the confrontation between Atticus and Amelia with growing curiosity. The only thing he could ascertain was that Amelia was not the admirer of Atticus he had imagined. It seemed Atticus regarded her as a relative. "I'm a bit confused," Sirius admitted, scratching his head in surprise. "What exactly are you?" Knock, knock, knock. A sudden rapping at the door interrupted Sirius just as he was about to ask his question. His expression changed instantly, and he activated his animagus form, transforming into a large dog in the dim, distorted light. "Come in," Atticus called out, his voice heavy. The Muggle waiter who had left earlier entered, pushing a dining cart. Sensing the tense atmosphere, the waiter glanced at the somber Amelia and the large black dog by the wine rack, but avoided looking directly at Atticus. Atticus watched the waiter enter, his pupils narrowing slightly before returning to normal. His face, previously solemn due to Amelia's questions, softened as he calmly observed the waiter setting 3 steaks, salads, and some snacks on the table, removing the lids. "Sir," the waiter asked cautiously, raising a bottle of red wine, "would you like me to decant this for you?" Atticus considered for a moment and gestured for the waiter to proceed. The waiter opened the wine and poured it into a decanter, gently swirling it. The wine, as deep as blood, swirled in the glass container, releasing a rich aroma that filled the room over the course of 10 minutes. Finally, the waiter retrieved 3 goblets from the dining cart and poured some wine into each. "Is there anything else I can do for you?" the waiter asked, slightly out of breath from his efforts. "No, thank you. After we finish the meal, I'll call the front desk to have someone clean up," Atticus replied, walking over to pick up a goblet. He inhaled deeply, savoring the aroma, and a pleased expression spread across his face. "Then, I wish you both a pleasant meal," Atticus Blaine said with a satisfied expression, prompting the waiter to breathe a sigh of relief. The waiter bowed, then quickly exited the room, pushing the dining cart ahead of him. "I'm so hungry," Sirius exclaimed, shedding his formal demeanor. He complained to Atticus before immediately taking a seat at the dining table. "Let's dig in." Atticus waved to Amelia, who stood frozen in place. Despite not having had a drop of water all day and feeling extremely hungry, Amelia was preoccupied with Atticus's earlier words. Thoughts of Voldemort's danger, her par, and safety, and the unfortunate experiences Atticus had endured in his youth swirled in her mind. "We are a family, aren't we?" Atticus's voice broke through her reverie, bringing her back to the present. Her voice, now hoarse, lost its usual clarity. "No matter what happens, we should." "Let's eat something first," Atticus interrupted with a smile. "The only thing we can't neglect is a delicious meal. We can discuss everything else later." Amelia pursed her lips and slowly moved to the dining table, where Sirius was already enjoying his meal. Under the dim light, Atticus raised his glass, swirling it gently. A playful glint flickered in his eyes. No matter what, Sirius and Amelia, I want to express my gratitude to you. You're working so hard for me. Oh, you can't do it at all, Atticus, Sirius mumbled incoherently, his mouth full of meat. He picked up his wine glass and drank it as if it were water, while Amelia took a small sip. Oh, right, Sirius said, trying to lighten the somewhat dull atmosphere at the table. He glanced at Atticus, who was cutting his steak and sipping wine with little interest. You mentioned you had a guess about who took your wand, right? Who was it? That's not hard to guess, is it? Atticus tilted his head, staring at his empty glass with a distant look. The person who did this took my wand inside the Magic Capitol building, as he killed people with fierce fire, and then left calmly. No one noticed, and the security measures were ineffective against him. He left no clues. What kind of person can do this? You suspect he's a congressional insider, Amelia exclaimed, startled. She stood up abruptly, but the sudden movement made her dizzy, and she swayed, holding her head. What's wrong with you? Sirius asked in surprise, noticing her unsteady state. But then, he too felt a strong wave of dizziness, blurring his vision. Unlike Amelia, Sirius, an experienced wizard and auror, quickly realized what was happening. The food. We need to be careful, Sirius managed to say, trying to stand. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't. Before he completely lost consciousness, he heard a loud thud, the sound of Amelia collapsing to the floor. He reached out towards Atticus, who had slumped over the table, but his fingers barely brushed against him before his body went limp. Darkness enveloped his vision, and he slipped to the ground, unconscious. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. The room was silent, save for the dark red wine from the decanter that Sirius had accidentally knocked over, dripping onto the floor. This silence persisted for an hour and a half, until the first quarter moon reached its zenith, undisturbed. Click. Gentlemen? The Muggle waiter from before pushed the dining cart and opened the door, but he didn't enter. Instead, he peered into the room through the gap. I was waiting for you to call me to clean up, but you never did, so I came to see if there's anything I can do for you. He called out twice, but received no response. No one in the room responded. Sir, is there anything I can help you with? The waiter's voice rose slightly as he released his grip on the dining cart's handle. He squeezed through the narrow opening of the door and closed it quietly behind him. His eyes widened in surprise when he saw Amelia lying on the floor and Atticus Blaine slumped over the table. However, his expression shifted dramatically when he noticed Sirius near the table leg. Gentlemen, he inquired, his voice tinged with surprise. A wand was subtly visible within the waiter's sleeve. He took a cautious step forward, slowly approaching the scene. It seems like you've had a bit too much to drink. Do you need assistance getting to bed? He asked, maintaining his polite demeanor as he moved closer to the table. Upon reaching the table, he examined Amelia, who lay on the ground, and his expression softened slightly. He then narrowed his eyes, scrutinizing the sleeping Atticus Blaine. Gentlemen, he repeated, giving Atticus a gentle nudge. Yet, Atticus remained motionless, not even uttering a sound. In the dim light, the waiter straightened up and exhaled a heavy sigh of relief. He adjusted his tight tie, shedding his mask of doubt. His eyes turned cold and calculating. Yes, Sirius Black, the animagus? He murmured, recognizing Sirius's face. Though initially confused and uneasy, he quickly dismissed these feelings. There's no time, the waiter whispered, as the wand slipped into his hand, slowly pointing it at Atticus. End of this chapter. Chapter 944. Waiting for someone to apologize. Atticus Blaine lay sprawled across the table, using his arm as a makeshift pillow. He snored softly, seemingly deep in slumber, oblivious to the wand pointed directly at him. The Muggle waiter, with a swift flick of his wand, caused the space bag nestled in Atticus's arms to soar into his grasp. The fangs are coming, he muttered urgently, aiming his wand at the bag. However, instead of retrieving the fang, a sudden burst of silver light erupted. The force of the explosion hurled the waiter backward like a lead ball. Displaying agility uncommon for a wizard, he twisted mid-air, lightly tapping the wall with his feet before landing gracefully on the ground. His hand, which had been clutching the space bag, bore deep, gruesome wounds from the silver flash, with blood trickling down like a stream. Yet the Muggle waiter showed no sign of pain. He gazed indifferently at his injured hand, and as if time had reversed, the blood returned to his body, and within moments the wounds healed completely. Cautiously, the waiter approached Atticus once more. He surveyed the 3 unconscious men nearby and sighed in relief upon confirming they remained asleep. The space bag lay on the floor, emitting a faint silver glow, indicating it was protected by defensive magic. Touching it now would be unwise. After a moment's hesitation, the waiter glanced at Atticus again. Contemplating his next move, he pointed his wand at Atticus, causing one of his hands to extend and rest on the table. The space bag floated gently back into Atticus's palm, and the defensive magic's glow extinguished instantly. The waiter manipulated Atticus's hand to untie the bag's tether, then had him hold it upside down and shake it. The contents spilled out like a cascade. Over a dozen magical books, several gold galleons, and finally, a fang as smooth as jade clattered onto the table. The sight of the fang left the Muggle waiter momentarily breathless. Instinctively, he reached for it, but hesitated, reconsidering his actions. He pointed his wand at Atticus's hand, guiding it to grasp the fang. As anticipated, the fang had been enchanted by Atticus. A faint light flickered across his palm, then faded into silence. When Atticus's hand opened, the fang lay there, pristine and unblemished. The waiter scrutinized the fang closely, gently prodding it with his wand. Everything appeared normal. The enchantment seemed to have dissipated. He seized the fang, and in an instant his face transformed. His eyes, now red and sinister, gleamed with triumph. Clutching the fang tightly, he turned to leave, but paused after a few steps. Returning to the table, he pointed his wand at the scattered gold coins and books, guiding them back into Atticus's space bag. A flicker of malice crossed his eyes as he bared sharp fangs. A sudden jolt of pain flashed through his red eyes, causing him to cover his mouth and gasp. He transformed his fangs to mirror the one he had taken, then slipped it into Atticus's space bag, returning it to Atticus's arms. After a meticulous inspection to ensure everything was in order, he prepared to make his exit. The Muggle waiter quickly exited the room, closing the door with a soft click. A chuckle echoed in the quiet space as Atticus Blaine, who had been sleeping soundly, sat up quietly. His penetrating gaze followed the magical silhouette as it swiftly boarded the elevator, ascended to the top floor, left the dining car, and disapparated. Withdrawing his gaze, Atticus reached into his space bag, and with a flick of his fingers, a fake fang flew out, landing on the table with a clatter. He glanced at the sleeping Amelia and Sirius, then moved his fingers again. A small glass bottle filled with purple liquid floated out. Uncorking it, Atticus let the bottle hover under Amelia's nose. As the purple liquid vaporized into wisps of vivid smoke, Amelia's peaceful expression immediately turned into a frown. Following the same procedure, Atticus let Sirius inhale the purple smoke. After about 10 seconds, half of their bodies began to twitch slightly, and then, damn it! Sirius suddenly leaped up from the ground, wand drawn, his eyes scanning the room with a fierce intensity. Amelia's face was equally tense, her teeth clenched as she gripped her wand tightly. "Don't worry, there's no danger now," Atticus said calmly. "Oh, Atticus, are you okay?" Sirius finally noticed Atticus's composed demeanor and frowned. "What happened just now? We were caught in a trap, right? That bottle of wine was the waiter a wizard. It's the living hell decoction added to the red wine. The dosage was enough to keep us asleep until tomorrow evening," Atticus explained. "As for the Muggle waiter, the one who initially brought you in was indeed a Muggle, but the person who served the food later was someone else." "Who was it?" Amelia began, but then stopped abruptly, her eyes falling on the fang on the table. It was the same one she and Atticus had rushed to retrieve at Sato Ryuhei's invitation that night. It had unleashed incredible power, consuming a piece of the sea of blood. Realization dawned on her, and she exclaimed, "It's vampires! They're here to steal this fang!" Sirius, who had already heard the story in Dumbledore's office, focused on the fang. "So, you killed it?" "Oh, not quite," Atticus replied, wiping away the illusion on the fang with a smile. "I pretended to faint and let it take my fang. This one is actually the vampire's fang. It pulled it out and disguised it as mine, thinking I wouldn't notice. It was so naive." "But why did you do that?" Amelia asked, and Sirius looked equally puzzled. Atticus lowered his eyes, smiling slightly, and didn't answer immediately. The truth behind everything had unfolded before him, and all that remained was the conclusion. "Because I want to see whose orders these vampires are following," he said, snapping his fingers. The fang on the table levitated and trembled rapidly. After a burst of blue light, it returned to stillness. Atticus let the fang float in front of Sirius. "I've placed a tracking spell on the fang that was taken. Follow this one, and you'll find the mastermind. I believe my wand is also with that person. Sirius and Amelia, I entrust this fang to you. Can you find it for me?" "Of course," Sirius replied without hesitation. "That's what I'm here for." He glanced at Amelia, who nodded decisively. Sirius held the fang, and as he turned it in his palm, the tip pointed in a specific direction. He was about to move when he paused, looking at Atticus curiously. "Aren't you coming with us, Atticus?" "Oh, you know," Atticus began, but his response was left hanging in the air. Atticus Blaine smiled and said, "I'm being watched by security aurors. If you want to leave, Atticus, those guys can't handle you," Sirius remarked, raising his eyebrows, "unless you have other plans." Atticus leaned back in his chair, interlacing his fingers with a relaxed smile. "My plan is quite simple. I'll stay right here and wait for the people from the Magic Congress to apologize to me." End of this chapter. Chapter 945. Tracking. "Are you planning to go back, Amelia?" As Amelia and Sirius, who had transformed into a large black dog, exited Atticus Blaine's room and hurried towards the elevator, Errol, who had previously blocked their entrance, appeared just in time to intercept them. His eyebrows, already arched, rose even higher. "Did you come here just to have a late-night snack with Blaine?" "This has nothing to do with you, Errol," Amelia replied coldly, her disdain for the security department evident in her voice. Errol shrugged, casting a glance at the closed door of Blaine's room, suspicion and hesitation flickering in his eyes. "If you're worried about Atticus sneaking away, why don't you go in and check, Errol?" Amelia remarked sharply, having noticed the emotions in his eyes. Errol's expression shifted momentarily, but he soon forced a bitter smile and shook his head slightly. "I think it's best not to offend Mr. Kohler. Blaine again." Amelia turned away, bypassing Errol's scrutiny, and strode purposefully towards the elevator. Sirius bared his teeth at Errol before quickly following her. Together, they swiftly left the World Trade Center. After a short while, they found themselves in a rain-soaked sycamore forest. Once they were certain they weren't being followed by aurors, Sirius reverted to his human form. The animagus transformation, a complex and rare skill among wizards, had always fascinated Amelia. Before meeting Sirius, she had never encountered anyone who mastered it. Curiously, she watched Sirius return to his human form and suddenly asked, "Did you use animagus to escape from Azkaban?" "Yes, exactly," Sirius replied, impressed by the perceptiveness of this young girl, whose connection to Atticus was still unclear. "The Dementors couldn't detect me, which gave me the chance to escape. However, that trick won't work anymore, as Azkaban now has other security measures." Sirius retrieved the fang Atticus had given him from his pocket, holding it in his palm. The tip of the fang trembled slightly but consistently pointed in one direction. Sirius looked towards the scattered buildings indicated by the fang and squinted. "We'll use a broomstick. It's the most suitable method. I assume American aurors are trained in broomstick tracking, right?" Amelia's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Sorry, I haven't had any special training, and I'm not very skilled with broomsticks." "No problem. I can give you a ride," Sirius said casually. He pulled a Nimbus 2001 from his bag, mounted it, and gestured for Amelia to join him. "Hop on. You can help us by casting the disillusionment charm to avoid being seen by muggles." Amelia nodded, raised her wand, and tapped Sirius's shoulder, then did the same to herself before climbing onto the broom. Although not as naturally gifted in flying as Harry or James, Sirius was an exceptional flyer. With a light tap of his toes on the ground, the scenery blurred around Amelia as they soared hundreds of feet into the air. Glancing at the void beneath her, Amelia's face turned pale. She screamed involuntarily, clutching Sirius's wind-blown robe. But before she could regain her composure, Sirius, holding the fang in one hand and steering the broom with the other, made a sudden turn to avoid a high-rise building ahead. The abrupt maneuver caused Amelia to scream again, clinging tightly to Sirius. To be here. She quickly regained her composure, offering a reassuring smile to the wizards. He's usually quite friendly, I promise. The wizards exchanged skeptical glances but nodded, allowing Amelia and the large black dog, which was actually Sirius in his animagus form, to proceed. As they moved deeper into the building, the atmosphere grew tense. The Woolworth building, with its grand architecture and intricate details, seemed to loom over them, its corridors echoing with the whispers of magic and history. Amelia's mind raced. The idea that a vampire could infiltrate the magical Congress of the United States of America was unsettling. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. "Sirius," she whispered, glancing at the dog beside her. "Do you think this is a trap?" Sirius, unable to respond in his current form, merely growled softly, a sound that conveyed both caution and agreement. They continued their cautious advance, the fangs in Sirius's possession guiding them like a compass. As they approached the heart of the building, Amelia's thoughts drifted back to Atticus Blaine, the enigmatic figure who had first alerted them to the vampire's presence. His warning had been cryptic, yet it had led them here. She wondered what role he played in this unfolding mystery. Suddenly, a shadow flickered at the edge of her vision. Amelia halted, her heart pounding. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sirius's ears perked up, and he sniffed the air, his senses on high alert. The shadow moved again, this time more deliberately, revealing itself to be a cloaked figure. The figure paused, then turned to face them, its eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. This was no ordinary intruder. "Welcome," the figure intoned, its voice smooth and chilling. "I've been expecting you." Amelia and Sirius exchanged a quick glance, their resolve hardening. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, determined to uncover the truth and protect the magical world from the lurking threat. Atticus Blaine returned to work late at night, his footsteps echoing in the dimly lit corridors. "Oh, who knows why he's here at this hour?" mused a wizard with curly chestnut hair, his voice tinged with boredom as he lazily scanned Amelia with a magical probe. "Probably just checking to see if we're slacking off. Anyway, come in quickly." The vampire, cleverly disguised as Graves, confidently strode into the magical Congress of the United States. Amelia couldn't help but wonder how he managed to bypass the security measures, especially the enchanted-looking glass hanging above her head. It was designed to detect any intruders, yet it remained silent. Downstairs, Amelia hurried to find Sirius, who was crouched low, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Before she could ask about the vampire's whereabouts, Sirius lifted his paw and pointed sharply at the ground with a clawed nail, indicating something significant. End of this chapter. Chapter 946, Exploration. Due to the events of the previous night, many Makusa employees were on edge. Several wizards who were scheduled for the night shift had collectively taken leave. Aside from a few strikers on duty and patrol, the hall was sparsely populated. Amelia led the black dog towards the elevator. As she neared the elevator hall, she quickly ducked behind a pillar. After ensuring that no one noticed her peculiar behavior, she allowed Sirius to return to his human form. "You mean that vampire is downstairs?" Amelia whispered in surprise. Sirius didn't respond immediately. Instead, he opened his palm, revealing a fang standing upright, its tip pointed towards the ground. "What's downstairs?" she asked. "It's the death chamber," Sirius replied, his voice steady. "And the detention room. You know, before convicting criminals, the aurors of the security department need a quiet place to interrogate those they've captured. The underground is ideal for that. But the problem is, the area is heavily guarded. There are numerous strikers and powerful protective spells. Only by knowing the correct way can we bypass those spells. I can't fathom how that vampire managed to get trapped there. Moreover, how did he sneak in? He certainly couldn't have forced his way in." "He's impersonating your immediate superior, isn't he?" Sirius suggested calmly. "I suspect it's the polyjuice potion. It's the only way to deceive the looking glass and the honesty probe using such a basic transformation technique." "Polyjuice potion?" Amelia bit her lip, considering the possibility. If true, it meant the vampire had acquired some of Graves' personal items. "How are we going to get downstairs?" Sirius asked anxiously, seeing Amelia lost in thought. "We need to uncover what this vile, dark creature is planning, right? If Polyjuice Potion can bypass the security measures downstairs, there's no reason why an animagus can't. The elevator doesn't go down there, Amelia explained, shaking her head. As far as I know, the death chamber and the detention room are deep underground beneath the building. When it was constructed for safety reasons, there was no underground passage to the Woolworth building. Aurors can only enter with a special port key. That sounds a bit like Azkaban, Sirius remarked, frowning. I assume the port key isn't easily accessible? The port key's location is top secret and frequently changes. Of course, it's always hidden within the building and cannot be taken outside. We can't locate it quickly. So, Sirius narrowed his eyes, is there another way to access the underground? Yes, Amelia nodded slightly. I've heard that the fireplace in Graves' office also leads directly there. In other words, to reach the underground, they would need to infiltrate the office of the Director of Security of Makusa. Sirius looked at Amelia hesitantly, not out of fear, but concern for whether Amelia could overcome the internal conflict. Breaking into the chief's office without permission was a serious offense. If discovered, Amelia would face significant trouble at Makusa. Let's go, Amelia said unexpectedly, her voice calm and resolute. Since we don't know where the port key to the underground is hidden, the vampire likely doesn't either. He must have used the fireplace in Graves' office. I believe, since he dared to impersonate Graves and enter the magical congress, he must have confirmed that Graves was not in the building. More likely, Graves has fallen into his hands. Together, they prepared to face the challenges ahead. A dog entered the elevator. After a moment, with a clear beep, Amelia and Sirius arrived at the floor where the security department was located. The corridors and office areas here were quieter than other floors. Typically, dark wizards who had committed crimes preferred to stay far away from Aurors, and there had never been a precedent of them coming to the department voluntarily. Consequently, the manpower here had been reassigned to various floors to assist in defense and to support Atticus Blaine. The vast floor was dimly lit, with only the minister's office at the far end still illuminated. Pursing her lips, Amelia steadied her breathing and moved forward cautiously. Sirius hesitated for a moment, but chose not to revert to his human form. He retained considerable combat effectiveness in his current state, and if a battle ensued, he could be of assistance. Conversely, if someone recognized him, it would pose a greater problem. The dimly lit office showed no signs of movement, and the door was closed. Amelia approached and checked the door handle, discovering that the defensive magic on the door remained intact. This realization worried her. It strongly suggested that Graves had likely been kidnapped by the group of vampires. She couldn't fathom how these vampires had the audacity and capability to execute such a plan, but given the circumstances, it seemed the most plausible explanation. As she confirmed this, a sudden realization struck Amelia like a bolt of lightning, causing her to tremble. I know why that vampire went underground, she exclaimed, her face a mask of horror. Sirius whined twice, nudging Amelia's leg with his paw. Oh, there's no time to explain, Amelia said urgently. Without hesitation, she pushed open the office door and rushed inside. Her sharp eyes scanned the room, confirming it was indeed empty, save for a small fire flickering in the fireplace. In a hurry, Amelia dashed to the fireplace, grabbed a handful of flue powder from the mantelpiece, and tossed it in. Then she seized Sirius's ears and shouted, "Detention room!" Moments later, they found themselves deep underground in the Magic Congress building. Before them lay a silver-white space. The floor, walls, and ceiling were all made of cold, indestructible silver-white metal. Beyond the room with the fireplace, spacious corridors stretched in every direction, each ending in several identical forks leading to unknown destinations. Entering without caution would surely result in getting lost. "Show me the way," Amelia commanded, placing her wand in her palm and uttering a spell. However, her wand spun aimlessly like a top, unable to provide a clear direction. Sirius also dropped a fang on the hard floor, but the result mirrored that of Amelia's wand. "There's a very powerful distraction spell here," Amelia noted solemnly, unsurprised by the outcome. Looking around anxiously, she noticed the absence of patrolling guards in the empty underground prison. Everyone seemed to have vanished, an obviously abnormal situation. After some thought, Amelia pointed her wand at the ground. "Reveal footprints," she commanded. A gentle breeze swept through, but the underground space remained calm. Amelia frowned, contemplating whether to stay by the fireplace and hide, as the vampire impersonating the Minister of Security would eventually return through it. Suddenly, Sirius's ears and nose twitched, and he darted into a passage like an arrow released from a bow. Sirius growled, urging the bewildered Amelia to follow him. Together, they sprinted through the mirror-like passage, unprepared for what lay ahead. Sirius found himself in a passage with a shimmering water curtain cascading from the ceiling. The ground beneath him was slick, making it impossible for him to stop in time. He slipped through the water curtain, tumbling across the floor. To his astonishment, he realized he had involuntarily reverted to his human form. "It's Honesty Falls!" exclaimed Amelia, her clothes drenched and clinging to her. She looked slightly embarrassed as she explained, "It can wash away all disguise magic." Her gaze shifted to the open gate behind the waterfall, her expression tense with concern. "I suspect this place is guarded." "I smell blood," Sirius remarked, wiping the water from his body with little care. He stood up, leaning against the fence door, ready to speak further, when boom! A deafening explosion erupted, accompanied by a burst of flames, tearing through the metal wall over 100 feet away. As they watched in shock, a torrent of water urged from the breach, flooding the entrance with a powerful force. End of this chapter. Chapter 947, Destruction. Like a dam collapsing, a torrent of shimmering liquid burst forth from the breach in the metal wall. Riding the crest of the surging waves were the lifeless bodies of wizards in uniform, crashing violently against the opposite wall. Atticus Blaine stood frozen, stunned by the sudden chaos. Before he could utter a word, Amelia, standing beside him, seized his arm and dragged him toward the fireplace. Amidst the rumbling, Atticus shouted, "What's happening, Amelia? Isn't this where you keep criminals? Why is there so much water?" "That's not water." Amelia's face turned ashen as she glanced back at the waves flooding the passageways. The silver-white metal walls lining the corridor lost their sheen, turning black at an alarming rate. "It's a potion, a deadly potion," she shrieked. "The Ministry of Security uses it for executions. It induces hallucinations in condemned wizards before drowning them in a watery grave. Those corpses you saw, those poisons can kill in mere seconds." "Your security department is truly twisted," Atticus exclaimed, breaking out in a cold sweat. With Amelia's grip firm on his arm, he leaped forward, transforming midair into his animagus form, a large black dog, and rushed toward Amelia, barking urgently. Amelia understood immediately. She gritted her teeth, leapt onto Atticus's back, and clung tightly to the mane around his neck. The potion pouring from the death chamber seemed endless, like a sentient force intent on eradicating all life. It sensed Atticus and Amelia, setting off a chaotic wave in pursuit. The question of who breached the death chamber required little thought, yet Amelia was baffled by the vampire masquerading as Graves, seemingly courting his own demise. Suddenly, a roar echoed amidst the tumultuous waves. Amelia's eyes widened in horror as she turned to see a shadowy figure riding the crest of the wave, rapidly closing in on them. It was Morgans, the vampire Atticus had apprehended in the Muggle restaurant. The poison leopard, its eyes glowing red as if under some spell, did not surprise Amelia. She surmised that the vampire had infiltrated the underground prison to reclaim control of the Magical Congress. However, she hadn't anticipated that this vampire was the very one Atticus had captured in the Muggle Cafe. How had he escaped imprisonment, and what emboldened him to return to the Mac and attempt to seize the poison leopard? Before Amelia could voice her questions, Morgan spoke in a sinister tone. "It's you. How did you wake up? Where's Blaine? Is he still under Auror surveillance?" "If you surrender, I'll tell you," Amelia retorted, raising her wand and firing several curses at Morgans. But he deftly maneuvered the agile poison leopard to evade them. "Anyone caught?" Morgan sneered, his eyes narrowing as he watched the black dog and Amelia racing ahead. Shaking his head, he said, "No matter how you woke up or discovered my presence, it doesn't matter. You're destined to perish here, and my plan will succeed." "Your plan?" Amelia's eyes glinted with determination. "How many accomplices do you have? What are you planning?" "My colleagues. Failed to uncover those secrets from you?" Morgans didn't respond to the question, but instead offered a cold smile. He gently patted the poisonous leopard beneath him. The beast's powerful limbs suddenly sprang into action, vanishing over the crest of the wave like a wisp of blue smoke. When it reappeared, it was already several steps ahead of Sirius, 10 feet away, flashing forward as if teleporting, and quickly disappearing around the corner of the silver corridor. "Hurry, Sirius," Amelia urged, knowing full well that Sirius was merely an animagus, not a true beast. He couldn't match the speed of a 5x-level ferocious magical creature, yet she couldn't help but shout, "That guy must be planning to—" Boom, boom, boom. A series of heavy roars interrupted Amelia's words. Sirius, too, had guessed the vampire's intentions. His gray eyes flashed with determination as he sprinted forward with all his might, rushing into the area where they had first entered. As he dashed down the aisle, he caught sight of the vampire named Morgans. Most of the wall with several fireplaces had been obliterated by the explosion, leaving only one intact. When Morgans saw Amelia riding Sirius at the corner of the passage, he smiled ominously. Then, riding his poisonous leopard, he stepped into the fireplace. As his figure vanished, boom, the last fireplace exploded in a fierce blaze, causing the entire wall to collapse. With the sound of sharp claws scraping the floor, Sirius halted. Returning to his human form, he stared at the collapsed fireplace, his expression grim. "What do we do now, Sirius?" Amelia asked, panic evident in her voice as the poisonous potion surged from the passage like an uncontrollable fire. Her pupils shrank in fear, and she turned to Sirius for guidance. "If apparition were possible here," Sirius began, his eyes fixed on the rapidly approaching potion, gritting his teeth. "No," Amelia panted. "This place is bound by an anti-apparition spell. We can't leave through apparition." Then, beads of sweat as large as pearls formed on Sirius's gray temples, and his breathing grew heavy as he desperately searched for an escape plan. Suddenly, an idea struck him, and he shouted into the void, "Fox!" Boom! Amidst the roaring waves, the slight burst of air was as sweet as the sound of nature. Seeing the phoenix making its crisp cries, Amelia exclaimed in surprise, "Oh cool, this bird can ignore the anti-apparition curse?" "Fox is Dumbledore's phoenix. He's incredibly capable." Sirius grinned, then looked up at Fox hovering above. "Take us upstairs, Fox, to the 98th floor." With a high-pitched cry, Fox enveloped Sirius and Amelia in red fire, and a moment of brilliance flashed before their eyes. When they regained consciousness, they found themselves in front of the fireplace in Graves' office. The flames that had been gushing from the fireplace had just retracted into the wall cavity, indicating someone had recently left the office through it. "Damn! We were just one step away!" Sirius exclaimed in frustration, stamping his feet. "Who is it?" A voice suddenly called out from the office, followed by the sound of rapid footsteps. Before Sirius and Amelia could react, Selena Hild from the security department appeared, her expression cold. Behind her were several aurors who were changing shifts. End of this chapter. Chapter 948, A Dire Situation. "Amelia, why are you in Mr. Graves' office?" Selena demanded, kicking open the closed office door. Amelia's panicked expression only deepened the furrow in Selena's brow. She and the aurors behind her immediately drew their wands, but they were not aimed at Amelia. Instead, they were directed at the middle-aged wizard with striking, chiseled features standing beside her. Several wands also pointed at the magnificent bird perched on the lampstand. "Don't be hasty, Selena," Amelia shouted, rushing in front of Sirius and spreading her arms wide to shield him. "We can't explain." "I'm waiting for your explanation," Selena replied, her eyes still icy, her wand unwavering. "You don't seem to be reporting any issues to Mr. Graves, do you? Sir, who are you, and what did you mean by that outburst?" "If I remember correctly," an auror behind Selena interjected, his eyes widening in astonishment as he scrutinized Sirius's face. "He is Sirius Black, a descendant of the ancient Black family from the British wizarding world. He's the only wizard to have escaped from Azkaban and the Dementors. I've seen his face in the Daily Prophet. I recall the paper mentioned that Black later became an auror and served in the auror office of the British Ministry of Magic." The mention of Sirius Black, descendant of the Black family and auror, caused Selena's wand to lower slightly, though her voice remained cold and stern. "So, Mr. Black, you came to New York on orders from the British Ministry of Magic. When did you enter the country? If possible, I'd like to see your entry application receipt and your wand-holding permission. Sirius's face darkened, as if he were staring at the bars of a prison cell once more. After a few moments of silence, he shrugged and replied in a subdued tone, "Sorry, I don't have those." In other words, Selina raised her wand tip again. "You smuggled yourself into New York, didn't you, Mr. Black?" Her voice was icy. "Then I'm sorry. According to the regulations on the entry and exit of foreign wizards set by the Magical Congress of the United States, my colleagues and I will have to arrest you. If you have—" "Wait," Amelia interjected, biting her lip with determination. "You can't arrest Sirius." "Unfortunately, Amelia, that's not your decision to make," Selina replied, her gaze fixed on Amelia. "Besides, you're likely in trouble yourself. I suspect you helped Sirius Black smuggle into New York, correct? Who put you up to this, Atticus Blaine?" The tension in the room was palpable, and all the aurors were on high alert, ready to act at the slightest sign of resistance from Amelia and Sirius. "I can explain everything, Selina," Amelia pleaded, glancing at the dying embers in the fireplace. "But not now. We have more pressing matters. If you could just allow—" "I'm afraid not, Amelia," Selina interrupted, unmoved. "Your only option is to surrender your wand, explain everything voluntarily, and then await Mr. Graves' judgment." What a troublesome situation, Sirius thought, frowning slightly in silence. He cast a furtive glance at the bird, Fox, perched on the lampstand, hoping it would fly to Atticus. But Fox merely watched the scene unfold with interest, ignoring Sirius's silent plea. "Oh, Mr. Graves!" Amelia exclaimed, suddenly remembering. She took a deep breath and spoke quickly. "Listen, Selina, Sirius and I are tracking a vampire. It's the same one Atticus apprehended at the Muggle coffee shop. I don't know how he escaped, but tonight he broke into the hotel where Atticus was staying and drugged us. This vampire used Mr. Graves' face to return. Atticus Blaine had managed to evade detection by both the looking glass and the honesty probe. He used the fireplace in his office to access the underground detention room where he wreaked havoc and took control of the venomous leopard once more. Exiting through the same fireplace, it became evident that he had somehow bypassed all security measures. I suspect he manipulated Mr. Graves, extracting the security department's deployment plan from him, and used a compound decoction to disguise himself. This series of events left everyone in a state of disbelief. Judging by their expressions, Amelia's account seemed like a fantastical tale. "Your imagination is quite vivid, Amelia." Selina was the first to recover from the shock, hesitating as she spoke. "I must admit, this is I'm not fabricating stories, Selina," Amelia interrupted, raising her voice. "If you send someone to the detention room, you'll see I'm telling the truth. The guards on duty tonight and the dark wizards temporarily held, they're all dead. You must understand, that vampire breached the execution chamber, which is now flooded with the lethal potion used for executions. Additionally, you need to dispatch someone to the transportation department. They can trace where the vampire used the flu network to escape." Silence enveloped the office. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Sirius ceased his silent communication with Fox and waited patiently. Selina's cheeks twitched slightly, and she wanted to reprimand Amelia. This girl, fortunate enough to secure an internship in the security department, seemed to be speaking nonsense. Yet, when Selina met Amelia's earnest and solemn brown eyes, she found herself at a loss for words. "Go and check the situation, Keble," Selina finally conceded, turning hesitantly to a tall, middle-aged wizard behind her. As she turned back to Amelia, who was visibly relieved and smiling, Selina's expression grew serious once more, her wand remaining steady in her hand. The next 5 minutes were excruciatingly tense. The atmosphere in the office felt stifling, as if the air had solidified. Finally, there was a loud clang. The tall wizard, Keble, nearly tumbled out of the elevator. He looked far worse than when he had left. His shoes were missing, the hem of his wizard's robe was corroded, and his face and arms bore burn marks. Even a few strands of his hair were singed. In his haste to reach the office, he knocked over several tables. Seeing his disheveled state, the aurors guarding the office door turned pale. "What happened, Keble?" Selina's voice, a mix of shock and anger, cut through the room. "What did you encounter?" "I barely escaped using the portkey," Keble exclaimed, breathless but relieved to have survived. The situation is exactly as Amelia described. A lot of people died. The atmosphere erupted like water hitting a hot oil pan. Amidst the frantic murmurs of the Aurors, Selena, her face ashen, shouted, "Aiden, warn Erel and the others. We need their support. Alex, head to the Magic Transportation Department. We need to know immediately where the vampire went." The two wizards' names dashed out, disappearing from sight like a whirlwind. Selena then assigned several more people to prepare for another attempt to salvage anything from the underground detention room. The security department floor was in chaos, leaderless, and Selena, along with several senior Aurors, had to step up and take charge. Aurors were dispatched under orders to carry out tasks such as rescue operations, issuing alarms, enforcing martial law, and gathering scattered individuals. Meanwhile, Atticus Blaine and Amelia were left on the sidelines, seemingly forgotten. Observing the chaos, Atticus frowned slightly. He stepped forward and firmly grasped Selena's arm. "Hey, listen!" Atticus's stern voice halted Selena, who was about to pull away, and she looked at him in surprise. "I am also an Auror, ma'am. If you want to save your leader, Graves, then based on my experience, this kind of mission isn't suited for a large-scale mobilization of personnel. Keep your team on standby, ready to act at a moment's notice. Select a few individuals, and Amelia and I will proceed to investigate first. If we encounter resistance, have them ready to support us immediately." End of this chapter. Chapter 949, Explanation and Crime. "I received your message, Selena. What happened?" Atticus Blaine asked, as he entered the room. Selena was still contemplating Sirius's suggestion when a group of people hurriedly emerged from the elevator hall. Leading them was Errol, accompanied by his team members who had been monitoring Atticus at the World Trade Center hotel. As they squeezed into the office, Errol immediately inquired about the situation. His attention was soon drawn to Fox, who was perched on a lampstand, observing the chaos with keen interest. After a moment of surprise, Errol noticed the man holding Selena's arm. "Are you Sirius Black, from the British wizarding world?" Errol asked with a frown. "Why are you here?" Selena quickly began to explain, and as she spoke, Errol's expression shifted to one of disbelief, as if he had been struck by lightning. "So, the no-mage who delivered your meal is actually Morgans, the one we captured earlier. He disguised himself as a no-mage and poisoned you, intending to steal Mr. Blaine's fang," Errol said with difficulty. "He also likely kidnapped Mr. Graves." "This is absurd. How could he escape from the holding cell and control Mr. Graves?" "It's not impossible," Selena interjected, her face clouded with concern. "We reviewed the visitation records for the detention room tonight. Earlier, Mr. Graves accessed the detention room through the fireplace in his office. I suspect he intended to interrogate the vampire alone to uncover what we haven't yet grasped, the purpose behind the vampires collecting those high-risk magical animals. It's possible Mr. Graves was overpowered by the vampire. This dark creature doesn't necessarily need a wand to perform its sinister magic. He could have subdued Mr. Graves and hidden him, then impersonated him to leave the capital and steal the fang from Blaine." Amelia glanced at Selena with a hint of surprise. Despite her initial dislike for the witch who had intruded into her home so forcefully, she had to admit that Selena's reasoning as an Auror was impressively clear. "Okay, even if you're telling the truth," Errol said, his brows still furrowed. He turned to Amelia. "But how did you know the vampire broke into the Congress after leaving the hotel? You were all unconscious, weren't you? And why didn't you inform me? I was right across from Mr. Blaine's room, wasn't I?" Amelia's eyebrows twitched as she realized the sharpness and professionalism of her colleagues. The flaw in her hurried explanation had been accurately identified. "That's because Atticus wasn't completely unconscious," Sirius explained calmly. "Atticus resisted part of the potion. He left tracking magic on his fangs and sensed that the vampire had infiltrated the Magic Capitol building. He arranged for us to pursue him. When we entered the building, the wizard guarding below informed us that the only person who had entered before us was Graves, so we presumed he had fallen into the vampire's hands." "Then how do you know?" Errol pressed. "Because Atticus guessed that the vampire took the risk to break into the Magic Capitol building again, likely due to the poisonous leopard he failed to acquire," Sirius replied impatiently. "If we continue to waste time here, I'm afraid the only thing we'll be able to do is collect Graves's body." After a brief silence, Selina turned to Alex, who had just returned. "Have you discovered where the vampire who used the fireplace in this office went?" "I have," Alex replied in a deep voice. "Isaac from the Department of Magical Transportation helped me trace it. The vampire's trail leads to a room on Manhattan Island." After a moment's hesitation, Alex continued, "A villa belonging to nomads." Normally, nomad residences were not permitted access to the Flow network. This was certainly not the work of the vampire, but rather a private violation by their immediate superior, Mr. Graves. However, for someone as powerful as Track Graves, such matters are hardly a concern. In fact, Mr. Graves had discreetly included an unknown nomad use in the Flow network, using it as his secret base. It's common for seasoned aurors to have a safe house prepared. After committing a series of heinous crimes, the vampire desperately needed a place to hide. The aurors speculated that he had extracted this information from Mr. Graves. Following a brief discussion, Selina agreed with Sirius's suggestion. She, along with Irel, Sirius, and Amelia, decided to head to the Nomad Villa first. With the combined magical prowess of the four, they felt confident in handling any single adversary, even a vampire. Meanwhile, the remaining aurors stayed on standby at the security department, ready to provide backup in case of a large-scale attack. "Sirius," Selina said, looking up at the phoenix perched on the lampstand, "stay here and don't move. If you hear my call, bring these aurors with you. Can you do that?" The phoenix fox stretched its wings, let out a melodious cry, and nodded in response. As the vibrant green flames of the Flu network faded, Sirius was the first to arrive at Graves' safe house. He rolled out of the fireplace, his sharp eyes scanning the room. Once he confirmed the area was secure, he exhaled in relief and stood up. Amelia and the others soon followed, emerging from the fireplace. "It seems we've found the right place," Sirius murmured, nodding towards the floor. A trail of large animal footprints led from the fireplace up the spiral staircase to the second floor, likely belonging to the controlled poisonous leopard. The first floor of the villa was clearly visible, yet the second floor was eerily silent. Except for Amelia, everyone present was an experienced wizard. After exchanging glances with the two aurors from the Magic Congress, Sirius and the others cast the disillusionment charm on themselves. Amelia quickly followed suit. Sirius led the way, with Amelia in the middle, and Selina and Errol bringing up the rear. They ascended the spiral staircase, guided by the leopard's footprints, which led them directly to the study. The study door was ajar. Sirius cautiously peered inside and then lifted his disillusionment charm. "There's a fireplace here, too. I think they've left," he observed. The study was unremarkable, neither overly simple nor excessively luxurious. Selina and Errol, having also revealed themselves, moved swiftly, one towards the desk, the other towards the fireplace. With a flick of her wand, Selina opened the desk drawer, revealing neatly stacked letters. She picked up the top letter, glanced at it, and paused. "The house does belong to Mr. Graves. I found a letter from Mr. Scamander to him," she said, showing Sirius the envelope's receipt and delivery information. Respecting privacy, she returned the letter to the drawer and magically locked it. "I don't know if this is good news, but," Errol began, his voice heavy as he finished examining the fireplace. "This fireplace is unique. It's a one-way round-trip fireplace, only connecting fixed locations. This means we don't need to investigate where the vampire took Mr. Graves. We just need to go into. Just toss some flu powder into the furnace, and we'll be where we need to be." Atticus Blaine suggested confidently. "Isn't this good news?" Amelia exclaimed, her voice filled with hope. However, her enthusiasm was met with silence. Both Errol and Selina exchanged glances, their expressions tinged with sadness. Sirius, momentarily puzzled by the silence, quickly regained his composure. With a hint of smugness, he explained to Amelia, "I suspect this fireplace isn't connected to the Flu network. It's entirely private. In comparison to secretly linking a Muggle residence's fireplace to the Flu network, this is a far graver offense. If we were in the UK, committing such a crime would land you in Azkaban for at least 2 years." Chapter 950, Finally Meeting. Upon hearing Sirius's slightly sarcastic words, Selina and Errol's already tense expressions grew even more uneasy. Track Graves, The chief officer of the Department of Security was a respected senior figure within the Magical Congress of the United States of America. Known for his strict self-discipline and integrity, he was a source of pride for the Aurors under his command. However, the damning evidence now laid bare before them shattered the illusion of Graves' perfection, revealing that this esteemed Auror was not as flawless as he appeared to the world. Amelia felt indifferent about this revelation. While she admired wizards like Graves, her admiration did not match that of the Aurors who had served under him for years. Moreover, some of the recent decisions made by the head of the security department had left her feeling disillusioned. "No one is perfect, Mr. Black," Selina said gloomily after a moment of silence, addressing Sirius. "Even Mr. Dumbledore, Atticus Blaine, and you, Mr. Black. I think you won't forget that you entered the United States through smuggling." Sirius merely curled his lips, shrugged, and smiled, unfazed by Selina's condemnation. The breeze fluttered the curtains, and the ominous, bloody moonlight filtered through the window, casting ghostly shadows that rippled like water waves on the walls of the dim study. Everyone in the room was focused on the fireplace, each harboring a sense of foreboding. They all seemed to sense that their next destination might not be as peaceful as this villa. "Are we," Errol hesitated, glancing at Sirius, "going to let that magical phoenix summon our people here?" "No need," Sirius replied, suppressing his disdain for Graves, who had caused Atticus so much trouble. He regained the calmness and professionalism of an Auror. "Even if you bring everyone over, it won't work. The fireplace can only teleport one person at a time. If so many Aurors want to reach another location through the fireplace, it will take at least 10 minutes. If there's an ambush on the other end, your colleagues are doomed." "But if there is an ambush, just a few of us," Amelia began, her voice tinged with worry. Only now did she realize how much security a great magician like Atticus could provide. Following him meant never having to worry about safety. "Even if there is an ambush, I think the 4 of us can hold out for a while," Sirius reassured. "In that case, Fawkes will have the opportunity to transfer all the Aurors at once. This could catch those dark creatures by surprise, which is more advantageous for us." Sirius's reasoning convinced Selina and Errol, and the 4 of them lined up in front of the fireplace. Unlike before, Sirius took the lead, while Amelia was left at the end. After a few tense moments and the sound of fire crackling, the 4 disappeared from the dark study. In the mountains and fields, strong winds howled through the lush forests, emitting eerie, ghost-like wails. The massive buildings nestled in the mountains were cloaked in the shadows of the green peaks, illuminated by the blood-red moonlight, as if they were inhabited by spirits. "Roar!" The poisonous leopard, its eyes now normal, looked up and let out a piercing roar. It leaped with all its might, aiming for the wizard whose face was obscured in the shadows of the blood pool. The powerful leap allowed it to momentarily escape the pool's grasp, but the blood seemed alive. As the leopard emerged, tentacle-like whips of blood cracked through the air, making a rustling sound as they ensnared the creature once more. The beast was dragged back into the blood pool with even greater speed, its cries echoing through the hall like a deathly concerto reaching its climax. The poisonous leopard, a formidable and dangerous magical creature, began to scream in agony. Once robust, its body had become emaciated, as if the pool was draining its very life force. Despite its fierce struggle and the unyielding light in its wild eyes, it was ultimately powerless. Under the cold gaze of a wiz, arred with red eyes, the leopard's cries faded, leaving only its withered skin to sink and dissolve into the pool. The wizard, who had stood motionless by the pool, finally stirred. He raised his hand, examining a smooth, imprisoned fang with indifferent eyes. "Amelia Dett and Sirius Black, are you certain they perished underground?" he asked. Behind him, Morgans, standing with a hint of shame, replied, "Before leaving, I destroyed all the fireplaces with apparition traces. There was no escape for them." "So, you're not convinced they're dead?" the wizard continued. "And you don't know how they overcame the potion's effects so quickly, or why only they and Atticus Blaine didn't appear?" Morgans remained silent, his head bowed. "Forget it, it's no longer important," the wizard said, shaking his head slightly. The blood pool, having consumed the leopard, began to change, A vortex formed at its center, rapidly accelerating and stirring the entire pool. Suddenly, a spectral roar erupted from the surface. The leopard, now a blood apparition, lunged at the wizard. But the vortex's immense pull shattered its form, absorbing its magic and life force into the pool, mingling with countless lost souls. A sharp crack resounded as the pool's surface pulsed like a beating heart. The vampires in the hall paled, feeling a surge of excitement in their veins, as if heralding the return of the Blood Monarch. Unprecedented changes, Morgans murmured, his voice trembling with awe. For centuries, the hated Holy See will fall. Unconsciously, Morgans approached the pool, his face alight with excitement. The wizard watched him with a hint of mockery in his eyes. "So, you're certain that injecting the power of this fang will revive it, Morgans?" he asked, turning the fang in his hand with a glimmer of anticipation. "I am absolutely convinced," Morgans declared emphatically. "The power that was once its own was stolen by the despicable Holy See. I don't know what happened, but the power flowed into the hands of Atticus Blaine, yet he couldn't comprehend the immense force it held." "Then let's wait and see," the man whispered, clutching the fang in one hand while drawing his wand with the other. As he chanted eerie incantations and cast mysterious spells, the intricate magical corridors surrounding the blood pool began to activate one by one, emitting a dark and ominous glow. The thunder within the blood pool suddenly flared with a more intense red light. The fang in the man's palm responded to an inexplicable summons, rising above the blood pool with a hiss. A resonant hum filled the air as the bloody thunder connected the vortex at the center of the blood pool to the fang hovering above, forming a conduit for channeling power. The pool boiled and roared, each drop of blood transforming into a face twisted with hatred and unwillingness. These faces merged, clashed, and devoured one another. The overwhelming magic enveloped the abandoned hall, exerting a pressure like a collapsing sky upon every living being. In a trance-like state, it seemed as if the blood pool had become a gateway to hell, from which a peerless demon emerged. The vampires gazed toward the hall with reverence and devotion, except for one voice that broke the spellbound silence. "What on earth are you doing, Mr. Graves?" Sirius and his companions, who had arrived through the fireplace, stood in shock behind a group of vampires. They stared at Graves, who was encircled by the undead and had his wand raised toward the fang, suspended in midair. Selena's scream pierced the air, a cry of utter collapse. End of this chapter. Chapter 951, The Betrayal. Selena, Ariel, and Amelia, a trainee auror, found themselves surrounded by hundreds of vampires. The sheer number was staggering. According to the Department of Security, there were supposedly no vampires operating in New York. Clearly, someone with significant authority was shielding these dark creatures. The three wizards from the Magic Congress stared in disbelief at Track Graves, who now exuded a chilling aura unlike his usual demeanor. They wondered if they were hallucinating. Amelia clung to the hope that the Graves before her was an illusion created by the vampire Morgans, but Morgans stood right beside Graves. In contrast, Sirius remained composed. When he witnessed Graves performing dark magic, he merely raised an eyebrow in surprise and then returned to his usual calm demeanor. Sirius had faced far more treacherous betrayals in the past. Selena's furious screams roused the vampires from their slumber in the hall. After a loud crash, they found themselves at the mercy of countless wands. Yet, Selena seemed oblivious to the perilous situation. Her worldview shattered. Her eyes reflected a storm of emotions: anger, disappointment, pain, and even despair. Graves slowly turned his head, facing his once trusted subordinates. There was no shame for betraying his colleagues, no anger at being discovered, only a serene calmness. This calmness shattered his previously solemn image, making him appear strangely approachable. "Oh, it's you," Graves said with a serene smile. He ignored Selena and Ariel, focusing instead on Sirius and Amelia. "You're following Atticus Blaine's orders, aren't you?" "Haha, I always expected that a wizard as talented as him would eventually uncover the hidden plans of someone as mediocre as me. He wouldn't just stand by." "Is this why you've been targeting Atticus?" Sirius asked, unfazed by Graves' demeanor. In the 2 years he'd known Atticus, Sirius had witnessed him unravel numerous conspiracies. "I didn't want Atticus Blaine to come to Wizarding America," Graves replied, still smiling. So, when Remus Lupin submitted the application for the import of learning machines to Congress, and I learned of Atticus Blaine's involvement with his workshop, I decided to bring this workshop to Congress. I knew the invention was revolutionary. Once the learning machine entered the American magical world, many magical families, including the Graves family, would clamor for collaboration. A werewolf couldn't control the situation. Atticus Blaine would undoubtedly come to New York as the leader, and then I'd have to face him, exposed to his scrutiny. He'd immediately understand my predicament and what I was doing. It turns out I was right. I thought I could buy time, but I didn't anticipate that Blaine would prioritize profits so highly. A wizard like him, willing to personally negotiate with Congress to introduce the learning machine into the American wizarding world, carries too much weight. When he applied for entry, I had no room to refuse. "What are you talking about?" Ariel asked, his voice trembling. While he struggled to comprehend, Sirius and Amelia understood. After a brief silence, Sirius looked at the senior Makusa official with indifference. "If I'm correct, you have Atticus's wand?" Amelia was initially shocked by this revelation, but her expression soon shifted to one of sadness. If Graves was behind the vampires, then who else could have killed Chago? "I never intended to harm an innocent wizard," Graves said with a hint of regret in his voice, "but I couldn't think of any other way." After the joint. During the review meeting, I clung to a sliver of hope. I wished Atticus Blaine could leave New York as soon as possible, but I never anticipated. Graves paused, his gaze fixed on the fang that seemed to pulse with a sinister energy. "I never anticipated that Blaine would possess this. Morgans informed me that if I could acquire this fang, our resurrection plan would become significantly more potent, eliminating the need to risk gathering blood from magical creatures. I couldn't resist the temptation, so I made my decision." Graves sighed softly. "You're right, Mr. Black. I killed Chago Piorio and attempted to frame Blaine. I know my excuse is flimsy, but it doesn't matter. I just needed a pretext to see if Blaine had retrieved his wand, to search his belongings, and to locate the fang. Once I found it, I intended to take it back." Amelia trembled with rage, her heart boiling with indignation. She finally understood why Graves, based on a flimsy and baseless suspicion, had sent Aurors to invade her home and threatened to arrest Atticus. Graves knew Atticus would never agree to be detained, but that wasn't his goal. He simply wanted to discover the location of the fang. But all this... Amelia, fresh out of magic school, looked at Graves with a mix of sadness and disbelief, her eyes drawn to the fang that radiated a chilling power. "Are you doing all this just to gain more power?" "Power," Graves echoed, his eyes reflecting a distant memory as he gazed at the fang. He smiled wistfully. "It's always so alluring. You must all know that my grandfather, Percival Graves, was once the Minister of Security for the Magical Congress. He was a formidable wizard with a sterling reputation. But at the height of his career, he encountered Gellert Grindelwald. Against the Dark Lord, all his power and reputation were useless. Grindelwald detained him, assumed his identity, and wreaked havoc on the city. Although Newt Scamander eventually thwarted Grindelwald's plans, he couldn't erase the humiliation my grandfather suffered. That esteemed wizard ultimately died of shame and illness." "So," Amelia looked at Graves in disbelief, "you're willing to commit murder for more power?" "I'm just an average wizard, Amelia," Graves replied, his voice tinged with regret. "I'm not gifted like Atticus Blaine or Albus Dumbledore, nor like Gellert Grindelwald or the mysterious figure in England. I've always known this. I have no grand ambitions for power." "Then why did you do all this?" Sirius asked calmly. "If not for power, then for what?" "Didn't Blaine tell you?" Graves asked, glancing at Amelia, who was also eager for an answer. He smiled, withdrawing his wand from the air and pointing it at himself. Instantly, his robe was torn away, revealing his bare torso. The 4 people following him reacted with varying degrees of shock. Graves's upper body was shriveled, resembling that of a dying old man. His skin was marred by a network of black lines formed by his own blood vessels, as if the blood flowing through them had been tainted by a curse. Observing the shock and discomfort on their faces, Graves smiled wearily. "So, you understand. I'm dying." End of this chapter. Chapter 952, Past Events. "As I promised you, Mr. Graves." Morgan stood up in the silence, his head bowed. It was hard to discern whether his expression was one of guilt or remorse. Once the ancestor is resurrected, he will have the power to lift the blood curse. I have no doubt about that, Graves replied coldly, casting a glance at Morgans. He then turned his attention to the silent crowd, a smile creeping onto his face. I imagine you're all wondering why I chose to partner with a dark creature like a vampire. Truthfully, I shouldn't be sharing this with you, but these secrets have weighed heavily on my heart for too long. Tonight, as the chains of fate are about to be broken, I feel compelled to share some of my secrets with you. Sirius's expression turned icy. He understood all too well that the more Graves revealed, the less likely they were to leave this place alive. Where should I begin? Graves mused, feeling as if a great burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He twirled his wand between his fingers, his eyes lost in reminiscence. I've already mentioned my grandfather. As for my father, he's hardly worth discussing. He was a mediocre student at Ilvermorny, lacking any notable talent in magic or otherwise. In a prominent magical family like the Graves, his mediocrity made him a laughingstock. Perhaps, in a twisted way, fate was kind to him. The Fangs continued to channel dark magic into the blood pool, which gradually became transparent over time. Graves released his grip on the Fangs and began to pace slowly by the pool. Now that you know about my grandfather and my father's situation, it's not hard to understand the expectations placed upon me as the sole descendant of my father and a direct heir of the Graves family, he continued. Track Graves, a direct member of the family, was expected to seek a high position in the Magical Congress. After Percival Graves was captured and imprisoned by Gellert Grindelwald, the family undoubtedly hoped I would avenge that disgrace. From the day I discovered my magical talent, my grandfather and family charted my future. They envisioned me as an exceptional wizard, someone who would uphold the Graves family's power and prestige. I grew up with these aspirations, sincerely adopting them as my life's goals. I aimed to achieve greatness, to erase the shame from my grandfather's name, and to elevate the Graves family to new heights. With such fervor, I graduated with honors and joined the Magical Congress of the United States of America. Thanks to my grandfather's insistence and the family's influence, I secured a position in the Department of Security and became an Auror. Driven by dreams and ambition, I excelled in those early days, solving numerous crimes and capturing many dark wizards. People praised me as a worthy descendant of the Graves family, but I didn't rest on my laurels. I continued to fight against evil, gradually becoming an experienced Auror and a core member of the security department. The previous head of the department held me in high regard. Serena, Ariel, and Amelia were well acquainted with these facts. Track Graves was considered a legendary wizard in the American magical world, and his youthful achievements were etched in people's memories. It was precisely because of this that his current situation was all the more lamentable. The first half of my life was smooth sailing. At that time, everyone believed I was destined to become the next director of the security department and that I would mission. Graves paused, his gaze sweeping over the gathered vampires. I was caught in a dilemma. On one hand, I had the weight of my family's expectations and my own ambitions. On the other, I faced the grim reality of my impending death. The vampire's proposition was my only hope, albeit a dangerous one. Atticus Blaine, standing among the crowd, listened intently. The room was silent, the tension palpable as Graves continued his story. I knew the risks involved in collaborating with vampires, especially those who had committed such heinous acts, but desperation can drive a man to make choices he never thought possible. Amelia, recalling what she had heard from Narlac, nodded in understanding. So you were willing to risk everything to find a cure for the curse, she said softly. Exactly, Graves replied, his voice tinged with regret. I was willing to do whatever it took to survive, to fulfill the dreams I had worked so hard for. But as you can see, things didn't go as planned. The Vampire's resurrection mission was fraught with danger and uncertainty. Despite their centuries of effort, they had little to show for it. Sirius, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke up. And did you find what you were looking for? Did the vampires help you break the curse? Graves shook his head, a shadow passing over his face. No, they couldn't. Their ancestors' blood curse was too powerful, too deeply rooted in dark magic. Even with their help, I couldn't escape its grasp. In the end, I had to resort to a forbidden potion to prolong my life, a temporary solution at best. The room fell silent once more, the weight of Graves's words hanging heavily in the air. Atticus Blaine, feeling a mix of sympathy and admiration for Graves' struggle, stepped forward. "You did what you had to do, Graves. Sometimes the choices we make are not about right or wrong, but about survival." Graves nodded, a faint smile on his lips. "Thank you, Atticus. It's a hard truth to accept, but one I've come to terms with. I only hope that my story serves as a warning to others, a reminder of the consequences of dealing with dark forces." As the meeting drew to a close, the vampires and wizards alike left with much to ponder. Graves' tale was a stark reminder of the fine line between ambition and desperation, and the lengths one might go to in the face of mortality. Morgans was one of the survivors of that capture. I discovered him later and struck a deal with the vampires involved. Utilizing the influence I wielded and the wealth of the Graves family, I agreed to finance and support their endeavors. In return, once their ancestors were resurrected, they promised to lift the curse that plagued me. Until that time, I was forced to rely on consuming forbidden potions, despite their severe consequences, to sustain my life. End of this chapter. Chapter 953, The War Begins. Atticus Blaine stood by the blood pool, his face etched with the wariness of a lifetime. His body bore the scars of battles fought and lost, a sight so pitiful that Selena and Ariel, his most loyal subordinates, could hardly bear to look. Their initial fury at Graves' betrayal had simmered down, replaced by a profound sadness. The disappointment and anger in their eyes gradually faded, leaving behind a complex mix of emotions. There was no denying that Graves had made a grave mistake. He had harbored a group of dark creatures, aiding their sinister resurrection plans when they should have been brought to justice. Over the years, he had smuggled and hunted magical creatures, even resorting to murder to obtain the fangs in Atticus Blaine's possession. Under the laws of the under-American wizarding world, his actions warranted a death sentence. Yet, they found it hard to condemn him entirely. An evil curse had befallen him while he pursued noble dreams and sought justice. This curse shattered his aspirations and his family's hopes for him. In a way, he was merely trying to survive. Sirius regarded Graves with a complex expression, a man who should have been a stranger to him. "Didn't you worry? Didn't you think it through?" Sirius's gray eyes narrowed as he glanced at the vampires they had been tracking that night. Through Graves' account, he learned that these vampires were not a united front. What if these vampires are merely using you? Perhaps they only wish to resurrect their ancestors. The mention of this possibility caused a ripple of unease among the vampires, their expressions darkening with murderous intent. Morgans, one of their leaders, opened his mouth to defend himself, but Graves silenced him with a raised hand. "I used magic and veritaserum to interrogate the vampire leader I captured back then. I am convinced that the method I obtained is true. You want to cleanse the shame of your grandfather, Percival Graves, and uphold the glory of the Graves family. Yet your actions contradict your dreams," Sirius remarked. "You attempt to resurrect a dark creature you do not understand. It might lift your curse, but have you considered the potential harm it could bring to the American magical world and its wizards?" "We are not that mysterious person," Morgans retorted coldly. "We do not seek pure killing." "Oh, really?" Sirius's voice dripped with disdain. "You claim not to pursue killing, yet according to Graves, over the centuries you have slain countless innocents and magical creatures in your quest to resurrect your ancestors, haven't you?" Amelia, who had been silent until now, fixed Morgans with a steely gaze. "That wad of blood you threw out in the cafe," she said icily. "Atticus told me it contains many human souls bound within that evil substance. It originates from the vampire you wish to resurrect, doesn't it?" "I've already said we don't pursue simple killing," Morgans replied, unfazed by the accusations from Sirius and Amelia. "But we are vampires, and our sustenance is human blood. Do humans feel remorse for the slaughter of cattle and sheep?" This was a debate with no easy resolution. For creatures like vampires, wizards had decreed that they could only consume the blood of specially supplied magical creatures. To touch the blood of wizards or muggles, or to hunt humans or wizards for this purpose, was an unforgivable crime. Naturally, vampires resisted this restriction. Morgan's views represented the most extreme faction within the vampire community. However, if they, already shunned by the Holy See in the Muggle world, refused to abide by the rules set by more powerful wizards, they would find no place in this world. Amelia was poised to argue further, but a glance from Graves silenced her. Atticus Blaine raised his hand once more, cutting off Amelia mid-sentence. "Thank you for your reminder and advice, Mr. Black," he said, gesturing with his wand towards the scattered pieces of clothing on the ground. With a flick, his clothes returned to him, and he dressed swiftly, nodding to Black with a gentlemanly air. "Do you have any further questions for me? Selina, Ariel, why have you been silent?" His two subordinates, who had once held his respect, merely stared at him, their eyes filled with sadness and disappointment, causing his breath to quicken. "It seems you have no more doubts, correct?" Atticus's face turned cold once more. He nodded slightly, casting a final glance at the pursuers who were now on high alert, and shouted sternly, "Then, kill them!" A piercing scream cut through the air, drowning out the ominous rumble of blood. In an instant, a dazzling spell lit up the dilapidated hall as if it were daylight. "Get down!" Sirius bellowed, having anticipated the attack. He swiftly raised his wand, causing the ground around them to rise. In the blink of an eye, 4 high walls formed, shielding them from the initial onslaught. Despite the overwhelming number of vampires in the hall, only a few were needed to surround and attack the 4 wizards. The vampires at the forefront unleashed a barrage of spells at Sirius and his companions. Even so, the high wall Sirius had conjured was quickly riddled with holes, and their survival seemed to hang by a thread. "Mr. Black!" Ariel shouted, pushing Selina to the ground and calling out to Sirius. "I know!" Sirius roared back, pressing Amelia's head lower with one hand while deflecting a cursed light that had penetrated their defenses with the other. He looked up and shouted into the void, "Fox!" Boom! A deafening explosion echoed through the hall, and a powerful white shockwave erupted beneath the ceiling, which was illuminated by a kaleidoscope of curse lights. The violent tremor shattered the hall's walls, windows, and ceiling, sending shards of glass raining down like a storm. Amidst the chaos, a large shadow appeared in the air without warning. To the vampire's astonishment, dozens of aurors descended boldly into the fray. Boom! The fiercest battle erupted, filling every inch of the suddenly cramped hall with roars and the gleam of cursed lights. Morgan's expression twisted with rage. He couldn't fathom how these aurors had arrived. The area was supposedly sealed by an anti-apparition curse, and the fireplace connecting to China had been destroyed in the initial attack. But there was no time to ponder these mysteries. Centuries of effort were at stake, and he would not allow them to be undone. Raising his hand to cast a bloody curse, Morgan's prepared to join the battle. But, wait, Atticus snapped back to reality. He surveyed the fierce struggle of his surrounded subordinates, his expression subtly shifting. "They can't win against so many vampires. Stay with me to prevent any interference." Morgan's hesitated, glancing reluctantly at the nearby battlefield, but eventually nodded. However, Atticus's assessment was not entirely accurate. While the aurors were outnumbered, their training gave them an edge over the disorganized spellcasting of the vampires. The confined space of the hall further diminished the vampires' numerical advantage. The aurors, including Selina and Ariel, quickly formed 3 large, transparent, bubble-like magic barriers. Each barrier housed over a dozen aurors, with Sirius and Amelia at the center. Ariel and Selina led their teams in a flanking maneuver from the left and right, steadily advancing towards Atticus. Fox spread its wings, and the creature hovered above the battlefield, observing the chaos below. It refrained from joining the fray, its attention fixed on Graves, who had begun casting spells over the blood pool once more. An almost imperceptible blue light flickered in its ruby-like eyes, hinting at a deeper understanding or intent. End of this chapter. Chapter 954, Horcrux. Screams echoed through the valleys deep in the Appalachian Mountains, making the ominous night even more foreboding. At the forefront of the Magic Congress, the body of a vampire, felled by a fatal blow, spontaneously combusted into ashes, carried away by turbulent air currents like columns of smoke. You have to be ruthless, Amelia. A sharp silver light suddenly shot out, piercing the chest of a vampire. Sirius turned to assess the situation and noticed that Amelia, who was following him, was still using a disarming spell against their foes. He couldn't help but shout, "These vampires have no intention of letting us leave alive. We must ensure they lose the ability to fight back. Just using the disarming spell won't suffice." A wave of incoming curses emitted a dazzling light, akin to a high-powered searchlight appearing close at hand, causing Amelia to squint. When these curses struck the massive magical barrier, it was as if a torrential rainstorm was battering a lake's surface, leaving the once smooth, transparent barrier pitted and scarred. "I understand. Amelia's voice was cut off by a sharp whistling sound that not only assaulted her eardrums but also her frayed nerves. Inside the hall, vampires were perishing by the second, their mournful cries a testament to the brutality of war. Life had become the cheapest commodity, and the cruelty of conflict was laid bare before Amelia. This was a far cry from the peaceful moments she had shared with Atticus Blaine in that Muggle cafe. The fear and urgency of potentially losing one's life at any moment drove her to the brink of madness. Her sole remaining thought was to bring down any enemy who dared to raise a wand against her. This was war. As she swung her arms repeatedly, the greenness on Amelia's face gradually faded, but her pupils, shrunken to the extreme, still revealed her inner screams in pain. It was the intolerance of taking fresh life, even if these vampires were guilty of heinous crimes. Boom! A deafening roar was followed by the heart-wrenching sound of twisted steel. Under the horrified gazes of many, the battered and dilapidated hall finally gave way. The stone pillars that supported it collapsed, causing the circular vault of the hall to twist, deform, and fracture, creating a heart-stopping scene. Amidst the cacophony, thick steel beams fell one after another. Many vampires, unable to escape, were crushed beneath the heavy beams, their blood pooling on the ground and inexplicably drawn to the blood pool. Beside the blood pool, the fangs containing the majority of the legendary vampire's power quickly merged into the pool under Graves' spell. Above the pool, blazing blood-colored electric light almost formed thunderous plasma, its red glow complementing the crimson moon in the sky, painting the mountains in shades of red. The surface of the blood pool sank visibly, and as it did, a vile and malevolent magic began to boil beneath the liquid. Though this power had yet to fully manifest, it was already influencing the battle within the hall. Both the vampires and the aurors within the magical barrier seemed to forget their depleted magic reserves, launching desperate attacks on each other. Even Sirius's gray eyes began to flicker with a violent red light. Kill these despicable vampires. They disgrace the Ministry of Security. Some aurors, including Amelia, who had weaker magic, were more affected. They shouted angrily, attempting to break free from the magical barrier to engage in a more brutal close-quarters fight with the vampires. Fortunately, ethereal whispers began to weave through the chaos, offering a glimmer of hope amidst the turmoil. Filled with a mix of disbelief and relief, the hall, once filled with tension and the threat of impending doom, now echoed with the silence of a halted battle. The unexpected turn of events left everyone, both aurors and vampires, in a state of shock. The music that had initially calmed the aurors still lingered in the air, its magic weaving a protective cocoon around the rare. Atticus Blaine, standing amidst the chaos, felt the weight of the moment. He had been ready to call for reinforcements, to summon the strength of allies, but now the tide had shifted in an unimaginable way. "Thank you, Fox," Atticus murmured, his voice barely audible over the lingering echoes of the hall. The phoenix, a majestic creature of flame and rebirth, circled above, its presence a beacon of hope and resilience. Selena and Ariel, still within their protective barriers, exchanged glances of astonishment. The blood pool, once a source of dread and dark magic, now lay still, its sinister glow fading. The vampires who had been poised to unleash their fury were now subdued, their leader vanquished by an unexpected betrayal. Graves, the man who had turned the tide, stood with his wand lowered, his expression inscrutable. The green light of the killing curse had extinguished the life of Morgans, the vampire leader, and with it, the immediate threat to the aurors. The vampires, once fervent in their devotion to their leader, now seemed lost, their ambitions thwarted. The oppressive atmosphere that had gripped the hall dissipated, leaving behind a sense of uneasy calm. Atticus, wiping the sweat from his brow, turned to Amelia and the other aurors. "We need to regroup," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "This isn't over yet. We must ensure the safety of everyone and understand what just happened." As the aurors began to gather themselves, the reality of their narrow escape settled in. The battle had been fierce, and the cost had been high, but they had survived. The vampires, though leaderless, were still a force to be reckoned with, and the threat they posed was far from eliminated. In the midst of the aftermath, Atticus couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a larger conflict. The magic that had been unleashed, the betrayal that had occurred, all pointed to a deeper, more complex web of intrigue and danger. For now, though, they had a moment of respite, a chance to catch their breath and prepare for whatever lay ahead. The hall, once a battleground, now stood as a testament to their resilience and the unexpected twists of fate that had brought them to this point. Filled with astonishment, Atticus Blaine didn't notice that the fang of Morgan, which he had been given, had quietly slipped from his pocket. It rustled softly before rising amidst the dust settling on the ground, floating towards Fox, who was perched on a collapsed steel frame. Fox, with his eyes already a striking azure, turned to gaze at the fang, now glowing with a purple light. There was no surprise in his expression, but a flicker of solemnity crossed his eyes. Ancient and malevolent spells echoed through the quiet hall. Graves was enveloped in a shroud of dark light, his entire being seemingly in agony as he waved his wand. His face was contorted and fierce, beads of cold sweat trickling down, yet his spellcasting remained fluid, as if he had practiced it countless times. As Graves flicked his wand for the final time, the excruciating pain forced a roar from his lips, a sound so filled with torment that it seemed as though he had been struck by a powerful cruciatus curse. Amelia shivered at the sound. The light surrounding Graves deepened, transforming into a dense black fog, crackling with electric energy. A sphere of bright white light erupted from his body, guided by his wand into the blood pool. Fox, the ancestral vampire, watched from his perch with bright blue eyes, as if witnessing an extraordinary event. Meanwhile, in a hotel at the World Trade Center, Atticus Blaine, who had been resting his chin on his interlocked fingers, slowly opened his eyes. A heart-stopping light flickered in his profoundly deep purple pupils. "Horcrux," he murmured, rising slowly to his feet. End of this chapter. Chapter 955, The Aureole Behind Silence, enveloped the room as vampires and aurors alike watched track Graves in stunned disbelief. The scene unfolding before them defied comprehension. Why had Graves killed Morgans? What was the nature of the spell he was casting, one so sinister that even the vampires, creatures of darkness, regarded it with dread? The radiant white orb of light hovered ominously, its purpose a mystery. What had Graves done to the ancestors of this vampire clan? It was clear that this was neither a pang of conscience nor a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was a meticulously crafted plan. A sense of impending doom gnawed at Sirius's nerves. Accustomed to danger, he found his voice trembling slightly as he finally spoke, unable to contain himself any longer. "What on earth did you do?" Graves knelt on the ground, his breath heavy and labored like a bellows. Sweat drenched his gray hair, strands clinging to his forehead and obscuring his eyes. Sirius began, but his question was abruptly cut off. A powerful wave emanated from the blood pool, sweeping across the room in a reddish ripple. Every creature it touched, vampire or auror, paled in response. In the hall, they all fell to their knees, vampires and aurors alike, including Sirius. Sirius's gray eyes flashed with determination. He gritted his teeth, struggling to stand, but his body refused to obey. Another force had taken control, paralyzing him. Blood. The blood within each person commanded their bodies to submit to the resurrected blood monarch. The sound of rippling water filled the air, reminiscent of the sea's ebb and flow under a moonlit night. It was a melody both crisp and sweet, lulling those who heard it into a trance. Many aurors appeared dazed, their minds ensnared, but not Sirius. His gaze remained sharp, fixed on Graves. Yet, suddenly, Sirius's keen eyes dulled, fear creeping into his frozen stare, boiling over uncontrollably. Behind Graves stood a figure, no longer a corpse, but the resurrected vampire monarch. It was enveloped in a red light as vivid as blood, like a majestic moon rising from the sea's horizon, a blood moon. Sirius watched as the vampire ancestor slowly opened its striking red eyes. This vampire was perhaps the most exquisite creature he had ever seen. Its skin was whiter than the fairest of women, its features stunningly deep, as if it possessed the finest traits of countless individuals. Every being that beheld its face felt their heart race. The only flaw was the pair of menacing white fangs protruding from its lips. This was not an adversary Sirius or his group could defeat. His mind remained clear. He wanted to signal Fox, to urge it to find Atticus Blaine. In the current American magical world, only Atticus had a chance against this malevolent and terrifying creature. But Sirius was powerless. His body was immobilized, his voice silenced. He could only glare with anger and frustration at the vampire, the embodiment of all evil. Suddenly, Sirius was captivated. The vampire's eyes were transparent, crystal red, akin to Fox's ruby-like gaze. They perfectly complemented the face of their owner, breathtakingly beautiful, yet, heh, a laugh echoed through the hall, shattering the oppressive silence. The strange, unsettling sound reverberated, leaving an indelible mark on all who heard it. Laughter echoed through the hall, drawing everyone's attention to Atticus Blaine. Ho ho, he chuckled, his laughter gradually escalating into a wild, unrestrained cackle. Ha! Kneeling beside the pool of blood, Atticus faced the fallen blood monarch. His shoulders trembled slightly, as if in reverence. Finally, he lifted his head, his eyes alight with a madness that seemed to consume him. With a swift motion, Atticus leaped to his feet, tearing off his shirt once more. As his gaze fell upon his bare torso, he erupted into a fit of maniacal laughter. Sirius, witnessing this transformation, blinked in disbelief. Just moments ago, they had seen Atticus's upper body marred by a network of crisscrossing black veins, yet now his body appeared restored, his muscular frame radiating the vitality of a young man in his prime. Could it truly be resolved? Sirius, Amelia, Ariel, and Selena, who had just listened to Atticus recount his past in this very hall, exchanged incredulous glances. Although Atticus had claimed that he would revert from being a vampire once the vampire's master was resurrected, skepticism lingered among them. The entire situation seemed too convenient, as if Atticus were merely a pawn in the vampire's game. Moreover, the frozen vampire ancestor had yet to make a move. Why then had Atticus's curse been lifted? Ho ho, this day. Atticus's laughter took on a chilling tone. Though his face remained unchanged, those who knew him sensed an unsettling transformation. This strangeness was unlike anything they had felt before. When they first learned of Atticus's betrayal and descent into darkness, Selena and Ariel had felt a sense of alienation from the man they once admired, yet he had still been familiar. Now, however, the sinister expression on his face left the group of Aurors utterly bewildered. In contrast, Sirius detected a familiar presence within this new Atticus. It was as if he glimpsed the shadow of Voldemort in him. "What?" Atticus exclaimed, spreading his arms wide and gazing skyward with an ecstatic, twisted grin. "The day has finally come. What a feeling of freedom!" He lowered his head, examining his open hands, exuding an aura so malevolent it was almost unbearable to behold. With a deliberate step over the blood-stained ground, Atticus's eyes settled on the reborn vampire ancestor, a smirk of sarcasm and ridicule playing on his lips. He raised a hand, patting its shoulder with a contemptuous snort. "Mr. Blaine, sir." The oppressive atmosphere in the hall lifted somewhat as Atticus moved. A vampire at the forefront, once revering them as deities, now appeared as a puppet under the ancestor's control, his teeth chattering in confusion. "What is happening, Mr. Blaine? Our ancestor is resurrected, isn't it? Why did you kill Mr. Morgans?" "Oh, that's an interesting question." Atticus circled the vampire ancestor twice, scrutinizing it. Upon hearing the inquiry, he turned with a keen interest. Scanning the hall, he noted the bewilderment etched on every face. He could feel their confusion. Finally, he fixed his gaze on Sirius and the others, a relaxed and frivolous smile playing on his lips. "I take it you're all feeling confused inside?" Sirius's expression was grave and intense. He refused to show any vulnerability before such a malevolent wizard. "I'm not confused," he replied in a low voice. "You've used some dark magic to control this resurrected vampire ancestor, haven't you?" "Oh, come on, Mr. Black." Atticus feigned a frown. You wouldn't deny me the pleasure of sharing this exhilarating moment, would you? Besides, the truth is far more intriguing than you imagine. End of this chapter. Chapter 56, Possibility. The battle in the hall paused momentarily. The Aurors lowered their magical barriers, seizing this brief truce to catch their breath. Erel and Selena approached Sirius, with Amelia joining them. Together, they all focused on Graves, who radiated a sinister and malevolent aura. Something's wrong, Ariel stated gravely, and both Selena and Amelia nodded in agreement. Sirius wore a similarly serious expression, understanding the implications of Uriel's words. Although he didn't know much about Truck Graves, the stark contrast between the Graves of the past and the present was undeniable, as if he had become an entirely different person. The Graves who had recounted his past was a criminal, guilty of unforgivable acts. Yet Sirius had detected a hint of sorrow in his demeanor, along with the bitterness and resentment of someone mocked by fate. Now, however, the man before them was wholly consumed by his own success, devoid of any emotions that could be deemed good. "Well, I do feel a bit perplexed and curious," Sirius suddenly remarked. "What exactly have you done?" "Oh, that's astute, Mr. Black," Graves replied with a polite smile, though his eyes held only cold pride, devoid of any genuine warmth. "Today is not meant to be a day worth remembering. I mean, I have finally shed the shackles of mediocrity and truly become a great immortal being. It is worthy of celebration, so I am willing to show some mercy. Allow me to demonstrate my extraordinary wisdom." Graves paced beside the blood pool, visibly excited. "But where should I begin? You asked why I am not concerned about whether the information given to me by the vampires I captured years ago is false. Would this despicable group, fit only to dwell in darkness, set a trap for me? You said you interrogated them with veritaserum and magic, didn't you?" Sirius inquired. "Indeed, Mr. Black. I wasn't lying earlier. I do believe the vampires spoke the truth. As long as their ancestor is resurrected, the curse on me can be lifted. However," Graves paused, gazing at the ancestor with an artist's appreciation, "I also considered another question. Even if I join the vampires' plan and help them successfully resurrect their ancestor, how can I ensure that the ancestor will resolve my troubles instead of continuing to curse and enslave me?" Sirius raised an eyebrow, but remained silent. "As you mentioned, I aim to resurrect a dark creature I don't fully understand, a vampire of immense power. Can I really place my hope in such a being, expecting it to be grateful and repay my favor?" Graves sneered at the vampire ancestor's handsome visage. "I know this is impossible. From my experience with these dark creatures, they understand fear, but never gratitude. I need it resurrected because only then can I survive, but I must also ensure I don't plunge into deeper peril." "So, when you resurrect this vampire, you plan to use magic to control it and make it your puppet?" Amelia interjected. "Ordinary magic cannot achieve this. My grandfather's unfortunate experience taught me never to underestimate a powerful wizard. I must be infallible," Graves replied with a cold smile. "I understand that controlling a dark creature far more powerful than myself is no simple task. It could easily lead me into the abyss. I was troubled by this when I first learned of the vampire plan. I scoured numerous ancient magic texts seeking powerful spells lost to history, searching for anything that could aid me, but my efforts were fruitless. That is, until I went to England." "UK?" Amelia exclaimed in surprise, quickly regaining her composure. "You went to St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries to find a way to curb the curse?" Graves nodded, a hint of appreciation in his eyes. "Yes, but St. Mungo's was as disappointing as St. Josiah's. After lingering there for several days, I decided not to waste any more time. Just before leaving England, it struck me that perhaps powerful black magic could solve my problem. So I ventured into the infamous underground wizarding community in Nocturne Alley, London." Perched on a steel frame in midair, Fox turned his head, glancing at the fangs beside him, and let out a low cry. In the hotel, Atticus Blaine gazed through the void, his eyes meeting Fox's blue ones. After a moment of contemplation, Atticus nodded. "I issued a commission in the underground world, hoping that some knowledgeable wizards could provide valuable information, sparing me the risk of resurrecting a vampire. At the time, I saw it as an act of desperation, but the outcome was disappointing. Those charlatans only sought to deceive me for galleons. However, by sheer luck, I stumbled upon an ancient book of black magic. It contained a spell so powerful, it promised to solve my worries about resurrecting the vampire ancestor and granting me true immortality. Sirius began to ask, but a sudden explosion interrupted him. Everyone instinctively looked up, watching as the white airwaves from the explosion expanded rapidly, clearing everything in their path. Graves also glanced skyward, his expression turning sinister as he sensed something amiss. "Oh, the anti-apparition curse has been broken. This magic." Another boom followed as the airwaves pushed beams to the ground, creating a sharp crash. A thin figure with gray hair emerged from the twisted space, slowly descending to the ground. "Atticus!" Sirius shouted in surprise, rushing to his side. "What are you doing? Are you Fox?" As that familiar face came into view, Amelia's breath caught for a moment, a profound sense of relief washing over her. The Aurors, recognizing who it was, relaxed, while the vampires appeared panicked and uneasy. Atticus did not answer Sirius's question, but simply smiled at him and Amelia, his deep eyes settling on Graves. "Atticus Blaine," Graves's voice dripped with malice. "You've been watching and monitoring us, haven't you? Is this your final question?" Atticus's expression remained calm, his gaze on Graves tinged with something akin to pity. "Oh, finally?" Graves seemed to forget he was recounting his success. His laughter was filled with rage, as if he had been humiliated. "You have no idea what great magic I have accomplished. I have achieved immortality. My life will last forever in this world. No one or any magic can destroy me." "Is he mad?" Sirius asked, astonished by Graves' outburst. "Oh, he's not mad," Atticus replied calmly. "It's just that something beautiful has left his soul forever. The world has never lacked ambitious individuals. From ancient times to now, you've used the vampire ancestor, a living being, as a vessel for your soul. I must admit, it's an intriguing attempt, but also incredibly foolish. Yet, I must thank you for making something that had lingered in my mind a possibility I wasn't sure was even feasible." "You're mocking me. Blaine!" Graves glared at Atticus with sinister eyes. "What exactly is that?" An elderly voice inquired as Fox fluttered his wings and gracefully landed on Atticus Blaine's shoulder. Under Sirius's bewildered gaze, Fox tilted his head, unable to contain his curious stare at Atticus. "What have you discovered, Atticus, about him?" End of this chapter. Chapter 957, A Hasty Death. The vampires and Aurors stood in astonishment, waiting for Fox. They were perplexed as to why a bird, rather than an intelligent magical creature, could speak. However, Amelia recognized the voice immediately. It was Albus Dumbledore, the headmaster of Hogwarts, president of the International Confederation of Wizards, and the greatest wizard of our time. Once the initial surprise subsided, Sirius focused on the core of the matter. Dumbledore seemed to be concealing something, speaking in riddles. Sirius suspected that the he Dumbledore referred to was most likely Voldemort. "It's none of his business, Headmaster Dumbledore," Atticus Blaine responded to the piercing blue gaze with calm composure. "There was a wizard in history who used this magic. His method was quite unique, and the vessel he chose to carry his soul was equally unusual." "Oh, really?" Fox's blue eyes sparkled with intrigue. "I haven't heard you mention this before." "I'm sorry, Headmaster Dumbledore." Atticus remained unmoved. "It's not yet time to share this story with you." Sirius, bewildered by what he heard, suddenly had a revelation. His eyes shifted slightly as he looked at Atticus, recalling their adventure to Azkaban last summer. It felt like a dream, where he witnessed the memories of Godric Gryffindor and Rowena Ravenclaw. Following the Founder's memories, they explored the secret underground of Azkaban Island. That journey left Sirius confused, but he knew it was tied to the secret Atticus was trying to protect. He had vowed to keep it hidden from others, not revealing what transpired during that journey. Atticus's reaction at the time was worth contemplating. Sirius remembered that when he swore secrecy, Atticus told him that if he ever disappeared, he should tell Dumbledore everything. "It's not time yet." Atticus had just echoed a similar sentiment to Dumbledore. Sirius's lips moved, but he ultimately suppressed his curiosity. "Headmaster Dumbledore," a low, hoarse voice interrupted, and Graves looked at the phoenix perched on Blaine's shoulder with a sinister expression. "If it's Albus Dumbledore." "Ah, I see," Graves sneered. "Is that where you draw your confidence, Blaine? You secretly brought Dumbledore to New York, in the form of a bird? I regret that we must meet under these circumstances, Mr. Graves. Dumbledore's sigh resonated through the shattered hall. I still recall 3 years ago, the International Confederation of Wizards convened a meeting on ensuring the safety of ordinary people within the magical community. Samuel presented a speech purportedly from you. Some of the suggestions were quite astute. Oh, really? Graves replied mockingly. I had forgotten about that. Dumbledore was about to respond, but Atticus interjected. He doesn't fully understand this magic, and he's allowed too much of his reason to slip away from his soul. Expecting him to repent is futile. Even if he could truly repent, he wouldn't be able to reclaim his soul. Atticus cast a deep gaze at the vampire ancestor standing beside Graves, resembling an exquisite wax figure. Repent? Graves bared his sharp white teeth. Soon you'll kneel before me, confessing your disrespect to a great master. Sirius couldn't help but sneer. No one who dominated the contemporary magical world had the audacity or strength to speak so arrogantly in front of Dumbledore and Atticus Blaine. But when he saw Graves twist his wrist, revealing another dark wand in his palm, Sirius's expression turned grim. "This is your wand, Atticus Blaine," Amelia exclaimed, recognizing it immediately, having once confiscated it herself. Dumbledore, Sirius realized something crucial. How much can you do in this state? Very limited, Dumbledore chuckled softly. At that moment, most of the Aurors regained their composure. With Atticus Blaine and Albus Dumbledore standing before them, they subconsciously relaxed, though the situation remained dire. Dumbledore was not physically present, and even if he were, it was uncertain how much strength he could muster, given his age and the fact that he hadn't fought publicly in half a century. Atticus Blaine usually inspired confidence, but his wand was still in Graves' possession. For you, Amelia said, realizing the gravity of the situation. She handed the wand to Atticus, determination shining in her clear brown eyes. No matter what magic he has learned, I believe you can stop him. Atticus, momentarily taken aback by Amelia's gesture, raised an eyebrow, but then smiled gently. Thanks, but I don't think I need. No? You don't need it? Graves interrupted with a smirk. Does this mean you already know you're powerless against me? Are you ready to die by your own wand? Dumbledore remained silent, watching Graves with a sorrowful gaze, while Atticus extended his hand toward Graves, gesturing invitingly. If you think you can kill me, then please, try. Selena's eyebrows shot up in surprise. She knew Atticus Blaine was a formidable wizard, as reported by the Daily Prophet across the ocean, but could he really face Graves, who seemed to wield some dark power, without a wand? She pursed her lips, ready to speak, but Uriel gently pulled her wrist and shook his head, signaling her to stay silent. Graves, seemingly tired of Atticus's calm demeanor, lost interest in further conversation. He glared at Atticus, standing calmly several feet away, and tightened his grip on the wand that originally belonged to his opponent. Slowly, he raised his arm. Unless you have the same ability as Harry Potter, prepare to die, Blaine, he shouted, swinging the wand down with force. Time seemed to freeze. Apart from the vampires, who were now panicking and scattering, Sirius, Amelia, and the Aurors of the Magical Congress of the United States of America wore expressions of fear. Many instinctively raised their wands, ready to shield Atticus from the curse. Avada Kedavra! Graves shouted, feeling a serene confidence. He was certain Atticus Blaine would fall to his spell, along with the phoenix associated with Dumbledore. As for the others, he had no intention of killing them. If they surrendered, he envisioned leading the vampires and Aurors to create a more perfect magical world. However, his fantasy was abruptly shattered. Graves's confident expression froze as he stared in horror at his right hand, at Atticus's wand. An immensely powerful force surged from the dark wand, one he couldn't resist. A flash of golden lightning blinded everyone, dispersing the scarlet moonlight that bathed the earth. Amelia heard only the anguished screams and the fierce howling of the wind, like the sound of something burning intensely. When her vision cleared, she looked toward where Graves had stood. He was gone, leaving only a small cluster of golden flames flickering on the ground. End of this chapter. Chapter 9 and 58. Disappears into thin air snap. The magic wand spun gracefully through the air, tracing a smooth arc before landing in Atticus Blaine's hand. much to the astonishment of those around him. As he caressed the wand's polished shaft, he felt a searing warmth emanating from it, almost as if it were scolding him for having let it fall into the wrong hands. With a gentle smile, Atticus murmured apologetically, "All right, I promise this is the first and last time, okay?" The ebony wand quivered slightly before settling quietly in his palm. Regaining his wand was certainly a moment worth celebrating for Atticus, yet the onlookers remained somber. While Atticus and his wand were reunited after a long separation, Sirius and the others continued to gaze at the faint golden flame with expressions of indescribable bewilderment. Graves was dead? This revelation didn't particularly shock Sirius or the Aurors from Makusa. With Atticus Blaine and Albus Dumbledore present, there was little cause for concern. Despite one being temporarily wandless and the other preoccupied with the Phoenix, the formidable reputations of these legendary wizards were reassuring enough, even under diminished circumstances. However, Sirius couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief. He had faith in Dumbledore and Atticus, confident they could handle Graves. But he had anticipated a fierce battle, especially given Graves's earlier display of confidence, suggesting he had acquired unimaginable power through some dark magic. Graves's boastful claims of immortality still echoed in their minds. Yet he had perished in a trap set by Atticus's wand before he could even make a move. As a seasoned wizard familiar with war and betrayal, Sirius maintained a necessary level of caution. He turned to Fawkes. "Is he finished, Dumbledore?" A moment of silence followed. Dumbledore's blue eyes, partially obscured by his drooping eyelids, finally met Sirius's gaze. "Not yet, Sirius," he replied in his aged voice. Sirius wasn't the only one taken aback by this revelation. The Aurors, who had been fighting alongside them, stared at the Phoenix in disbelief. "But hasn't he been destroyed by Atticus's magic?" Amelia exclaimed, pointing at the thin layer of ashes on the ground. "Temporarily?" Sirius caught the nuance. "What do you mean, Dumbledore? What do you mean temporarily?" Suddenly, an ominous wind swept through the hall. Amidst the swirling smoke and dust, a shadow emerged from the ashes near the blood pool. This shadow was neither visible nor tangible, more elusive than a ghost. It was a mass of constantly shifting darkness, with a pair of scarlet eyes fixed intently on them. "What on earth is that?" Ariel's voice trembled with shock and horror as the apparition defied his understanding of magic. The sinister shadow hovered in the air, its scarlet eyes locked onto Atticus. Though it remained silent, the hatred in its gaze was unmistakable. Atticus stood with his arms at his sides, meeting the shadow's malevolent stare with a calm, detached expression. He did not respond to Ariel's question, seemingly waiting for something, while Fawkes mirrored his stance on his shoulder. "I will return," the shadow finally hissed, its voice a cacophony of sharp, grating tones that pierced the air like a dozen musical saws, sending shivers down their spines and filling their hearts with dread. With those words, the shadow's indistinct form began to rise and fall violently, as if preparing for something ominous. The atmosphere grew increasingly chaotic, as if something was on the verge of breaking free. Suddenly, an extraordinary event unfolded. Without any warning, the ancestor puppet by the blood pool dissolved into a red light that shot skyward. Before anyone could react, the light pierced through the shattered dome and ascended into the night. It soared high, surpassing the tallest peaks of the Appalachian Mountains, tearing through the sparse clouds, and finally, it hovered in the sky, glowing alongside the blood moon. A chilling sigh, as if from the depths of high space, echoed in Sirius's ears. As he gazed at the red light, now a prominent spot against the crimson moon, a shiver ran down his spine, and cold sweat broke out on his skin. He wasn't alone in his terror. In the hall, the remaining vampires fell to their knees, as if confronted by a monstrous entity, pressing their foreheads to the ground, their bodies trembling uncontrollably. The red light began its descent, trailing a magnificent fiery tail, heading back toward the Appalachian Mountains. In the dense jungle covering the peaks and valleys, both ordinary creatures and magical beings sensed impending doom. Panic-stricken, they fled in all directions. Boom! Like a dam bursting, a furious flood surged with earth-shattering force. Just as it was about to obliterate the remaining structures in the valley, the red light exploded, transforming into a vast, menacing sea of blood that hovered ominously in the air. Within the turbulent sea, countless tormented, blood-red faces flickered in and out of view. Sirius was certain he saw the face of Truck Graves among them, contorted in agony, struggling desperately to escape. Yet, a wave of blood, composed of many such faces, crashed down, engulfing Graves' visage until it vanished completely. Atticus Blaine and Fox observed the sea of blood with grave expressions, maintaining their composure, while others fared far worse. Inside the hall, the vampires lay prostrate, and most of the aurors from the Magic Congress displayed expressions of horror in the face of the terrifying, ominous sea. Many collapsed, convulsing with fear. Some aurors, retaining a shred of sanity, abandoned their comrades and apparated away. Only a few congressional employees, like Selena, Ariel, and Amelia, struggled to remain calm, though their trembling legs betrayed their imminent collapse. Roar! A massive, grotesque face emerged from the churning sea of blood. Its gaping, bloody maw unleashed a deafening roar at the creatures below. The force of the wind obliterated the Magic Congress's forward base. Amidst the rumbling, smoke and dust billowed around them. Atticus sensed something amiss. His brow furrowed slightly as he swiftly raised his wand. A milky white light surged from its tip, forming a vast protective barrier shaped like an inverted bowl. As the magic took hold, countless tentacles with human-like heads sprouted from the blood-formed face. These horrifying appendages reached toward the ground, and amidst cries of terror and despair, the mouths of the human faces on the tentacles opened, seizing the surrendered vampires and dragging them into the sea of blood to dissolve. The bloody faces that attacked the capital aurors were halted by Atticus Blaine's formidable barrier. After a series of frustrated roars, they retreated into the shadows from whence they came. Even Graves' ghost was taken aback by this unexpected turn of events. He couldn't comprehend why things had changed so drastically. Wasn't the ancestor of this vampire supposed to be his Horcrux? His plan was to transfer his soul into the vampire's body, supplanting the fragile consciousness that had emerged upon the vampire's rebirth. This would allow him to fully control a body that neither decayed nor could be destroyed, thus achieving eternal life. But now, what was happening? In the midst of the blood-red sea, a terrifying visage composed of countless faces let out another piercing roar, its fierce wind pressure distorting the air. The shadow looming over the aurors finally regained its senses and attempted to flee. However, at that very moment, a powerful force of attraction erupted. The hall, already teetering on the brink of collapse, was pulled skyward by this force, swallowed by the churning sea of blood. The shadow, too, was drawn into the crimson depths, vanishing at last with its resentment, hatred, and unfulfilled dreams. End of this chapter. Chapter 959. The End? The monstrous face opened its gaping maw, unleashing a powerful suction that whipped up a fierce, evil wind. Sand and rocks were drawn into the seemingly bottomless abyss. Although Sirius and his companions were shielded by Atticus Blaine's magical barrier and remained unaffected, the earth-shattering spectacle before them was terrifying. It felt as if an invisible hand was squeezing their throats. Struggling to find his voice, Sirius managed to scream, "What on earth is that?" Crack! The intense suction caused deep fissures to appear in the solid rock foundation of the station hall. All the newly arrived vampires, save for the shadowy figure of Graves, were slaughtered by the very vampire ancestor they had long sought to resurrect. A collection of blood and residual soul power, Atticus Blaine's lilac eyes glimmered as his solemn voice reached Sirius's ears. "It's just a display, not particularly powerful, but it won't be easy to destroy." Not powerful. How could such a terrifying creature be dismissed as mere showmanship? The remaining aurors of the Magical Congress exchanged incredulous glances with Atticus Blaine. They were well aware of his formidable abilities. Some had even witnessed his prowess at the Quidditch World Cup last year, where he had effortlessly subdued Vitia Cleona. Yet the blood-red sea, looming above them, covering several mountaintops, seemed far more formidable than Vitia Cleona. Was Atticus Blaine being overly confident? Despite his trust in Atticus, Sirius had never encountered anything so dreadful. He sought reassurance in Fawkes's blue eyes, hoping for Dumbledore's insight. However, Dumbledore, noticing Sirius's gaze, remained silent. His voice, unlike Atticus's, was tinged with concern. "Atticus, the power within Fawkes is limited. I fear I cannot offer you much assistance." "It's all right, Headmaster Dumbledore," Atticus replied, seemingly unfazed by the commotion. He twisted his wrist, and golden sparks erupted from his staff. As if heralding something ominous, the giant face in the sea of blood dissolved back into the crimson depths before Atticus could act. The entire blood sea, suspended above the mountain, continued to churn violently. Faces within it emitted mournful wails that pierced the air. With these sharp, haunting cries, the sea of blood began to contract, converging towards its core at a speed visible to the naked eye. Within seconds, it condensed into a dense, bright red mass, its surface rippling slightly, exuding a potent and ominous magic. Everyone watched in silence, their eyes fixed on the blood clot. It seemed to have shrunk to its limit, no longer diminishing in size, but the ripples on its surface grew more intense. From the turbulent outline, a slender white hand emerged, followed by the rest of the limbs, and then a handsome, yet unnervingly feminine face. The torso formed from the remaining blood. The breeze swept across the hills, restoring clarity to the night. The faint red moonlight bathed the earth, and the original vampire, born from the blood pool, stood before them once more. Slowly, he opened eyes as clear as amber, surveying the mountains and forests before settling his gaze on the distant, illuminated city. The vampire ancestor raised his head, his expression slightly pleased as he beheld the blood moon in the sky. Fawkes's deep blue eyes reflected clear disdain and indifference. "Atticus, if this creature escapes, it will cause great trouble." Atticus nodded slightly, his pupils beginning to twist slowly, as if preparing for the inevitable confrontation. From a vortex that continuously seeped out a deep purple hue, the air around Atticus Blaine became sticky and oppressive. Those standing nearby, except for Dumbledore, Sirius, Amelia, and a few others, could not withstand the suffocating pressure and began to slowly retreat. Albus Dumbledore and Atticus Blaine, the sharp and hollow voice of the vampire ancestor intoned as he slowly lowered his head, his crimson eyes settling on Atticus and Fawkes. His voice was peculiar, youthful yet laden with the weight of ages, and the gentlemanly smile he wore was akin to a predator ready to pounce. "Wizard," he continued, as if he had been silent for too long and needed to reacquaint himself with speech. Despite this, he managed to articulate the names of Atticus and Dumbledore. "For centuries, wizards have had great men who offer eternal life to those who surrender," he declared. Atticus raised his eyelids, glancing at the setting moon before turning his gaze to Fawkes. With a resonant cry, Fawkes lifted his head, shattering the night's oppressive gloom. His deep blue eyes gleamed brightly as he suddenly spread his wings and soared towards the vampire ancestor. Simultaneously, Atticus's eyes hardened. He stepped into the air, and in an instant he was above the vampire ancestor's head. "Regrettably, resistance will be—" The vampire's pale face twisted with murderous intent as he attempted to pronounce his verdict on Atticus and Dumbledore. However, before he could finish, Atticus and Dumbledore had already sprung into action. Boom! A roar, reminiscent of the world's creation, echoed in everyone's ears as the pure light of dawn suddenly burst forth in the sky. This radiant light dispelled the crimson moonlight, rapidly expanding in all directions and enveloping everything in sight. Those on the ground experienced a moment of disorientation, as if they had been tossed into a washing machine. When they regained their senses, they were astonished to find themselves in a different world. The moon remained unchanged, the mountains stood as they were, and the lush primeval forest stretched beyond the horizon. Yet everything around them, including the people on the ground, appeared in a strange pale hue, as if a thin layer of white sand obscured their vision. Amelia wanted to scream, but she found herself immobilized, like a mosquito trapped in amber. She noticed the dust and leaves suspended in the air, frozen in time. Even the wind seemed to have left traces. The entire world appeared to be under a petrification spell. No, it was just them who were petrified and stripped of their color. Fawkes's feathers remained as vibrant as ever. He spread his wings and flew towards the chest of the enraged vampire ancestor with unwavering determination. After a burst of fierce and brilliant flames, Fawkes let out a wail and transformed into a fledgling, landing in Atticus's palm, his eyes regaining their ruby hue. The vampire, pierced through the chest by Fawkes, lost his form with a scream, transforming not into a sea of blood, but into an indescribable monstrosity composed of countless head-shaped souls, gathered and stacked together. Those who dared to look up at the sky felt a chill run down their spines at the sight. A long rainbow-like streak of golden flame descended from the sky, striking the soul monster that had been sewn together. Under the surging flames, countless souls screamed continuously, yet remained unharmed. Die! The myriad residual souls of the gathered monster glared at the impassive Atticus with resentment, roaring in unison. Then, the massive, bloated body writhed, and a colossal arm composed of residual souls took shape, raising a loud whistling sound as it descended. Atticus Blaine. In the blink of an eye, the enormous hand seized both Atticus Blaine and Fox within its grasp. Sirius's eyes flared with a fiery red, burning with rage. He struggled with all his might to move, but the overwhelming pressure in the air rendered him immobile. Amelia, already drained of color, wore an expression of utter despair, her face growing even paler. Had she not been petrified, she would have collapsed to the ground. Are Atticus and Fox doomed? End of this chapter. Chapter 960, The End of Everything. The soul monster hovered ominously in midair, its massive hand composed of countless tormented souls with ferocious faces. Under the horrified gaze of everyone present, it reached out and seized Atticus Blaine. In that instant, the mood within the Magical Congress of the United States plummeted to despair. Selina, who had always harbored a dislike for Atticus Blaine due to Graves' influence, was now engulfed by a wave of despair. She stared blankly at the myriad faces emitting shrill laughter, regret gnawing at her soul like a venomous serpent. For so long she had revered Track Graves, a dark wizard who had forsaken his principles and broken the law to survive. She believed that powerful wizards like Atticus Blaine, who challenged the system, should be more restricted. Despite the unfair treatment he had endured, Atticus Blaine bore no grudges. Instead, he sought to rectify the great disaster caused by Graves, fighting tirelessly for the safety of the American wizarding world and its people. Tears glistened in Selina's eyes as she finally acknowledged Atticus Blaine's status as the most powerful wizard of the contemporary era and vice president of the International Confederation of Wizards. No! A voice suddenly pierced the silence. Amelia trembled, her heart overwhelmed by an endless tide of pain. She defied the suppression and cried out. Her gaze was fixed on the phantom fist clenched tightly above, tears streaming down her face. This was so unfair. Fate was so unjust to Atticus. Amelia sobbed in profound sorrow. This man, abandoned by his parents at birth, had risen to the pinnacle of the wizarding world through sheer determination. He should have harbored resentment towards the world, but he didn't. Atticus had consistently fought against the forces of darkness, ultimately earning the world's respect. He was a kind soul, and Amelia, who had been by his side day and night, was certain of this. Despite possessing immense power, Atticus always exercised restraint. He could have ignored the unfair treatment from the Magic Congress, yet he strove to abide by the rules. He could have turned his back on his parents, but he chose to show kindness. Most importantly, he could have ignored the chaos Graves had caused. But tonight, he stood here, fighting to protect his people. Despair and sadness lingered in everyone's hearts, except for Sirius. After several attempts to break free from the magic that imprisoned him, Sirius finally realized the truth. This magic had ensnared everyone, dragging the world into a pale, magical realm. If he wasn't mistaken, it originated from either Atticus or Dumbledore. With the rebirth of Fawkes, Dumbledore's power had dissipated, yet the force imprisoning them remained. This seemed to suggest that, just as the rage in Sirius's eyes transformed into hope, the pale sky suddenly shifted. In this colorless world, a beam of milky white light emerged from between the monster's clasped fingers. The light was pure and flawless, as warm as the holy light of heaven, instilling endless hope. The proud and arrogant monster was stunned, staring blankly at the milky white light emanating from its palms, unable to comprehend what was happening. Suddenly, an indescribable pressure descended from the sky. Every inch of air in the condensed space trembled under this strange force, as if a holy presence was being forged within the milky white halo. Roar, the vampire ancestor, whose body was composed of a complex soul, a force filled with desire, suddenly screamed in agony. Thousands of sharp voices intertwined, creating ripples in the air of this seemingly unshakable world, weakening the confining power of the strange space. Amelia realized she could speak. "Atticus!" she cried, her pretty face still streaked with tears. "Atticus!" The events unfolding filled Sirius's heart with excitement and emotion, prompting him to shout into the air, "Mr. Blaine! Judge this monster, Mr. Blaine! Don't let him go, Mr. Blaine!" Amelia and Sirius's cries signaled a change, and the sequent shouts transformed the once pale, imprisoned world into something vivid and colorful. The monster's roar betrayed its uncontrollable pain. Under the crowd's eager gaze, the milky white halo blooming between the fingers of the large hand holding Atticus's soul grew stronger. The evil soul forming the massive palm melted away visibly, like snow meeting spring. Eventually, the holy ball of light was fully revealed to everyone. However, as the holy and dazzling light dimmed slightly, allowing the figure at its center to come into view, the cheers that had been rising from the ground stopped abruptly. The crowd's excited eyes turned to confusion. The figure surrounded by the milky white halo was not Atticus, but a magical creature, a snake with black and white wings. "Oh, this is it!" Sirius blinked in confusion before suddenly realizing. He had seen this magical creature before, back when his name had not yet been cleared and he was still wanted by the Ministry of Magic. He had sneaked into Hogwarts to watch Harry's Quidditch game when the Dementors guarding Hogwarts lost control and rushed onto the campus. To expel the Dementors, Atticus had released his Patronus, a Patronus so enormous it was incomprehensible, a strange snake with black and white wings on its back. Staring at the strange snake in the halo, the faces attached to the soul monster displayed expressions of fear. They recognized it as a complete, pure, and immensely powerful soul. Such a flawless soul was their natural enemy. Cowardice and fear appeared on every distorted face, bringing the indescribable body of the gigantic soul monster to the brink of collapse. The Teng snake in the halo noticed the retreat of the residual souls just in time. It stretched its body and gently flapped its wings. As an invisible force swept across, many golden spots of light appeared from nothingness in the vast space centered on Atticus. They were scattered throughout the space like stars in the deep universe, seemingly random yet mysteriously connected. The golden spots of light began to flicker, and the pale void they encompassed was suddenly tinged with a faint red. An irresistible high temperature seemed to emanate from the red area, distorting the space itself. The souls, impervious to fierce fire, let out heart-wrenching screams. Under this higher-level power, they quickly melted away, peeled off layer by layer. Their forms shrank visibly until a deep red and black liquid core was exposed. When this core was expelled into the field, created by the golden light spots, boom, numerous golden dots of light exploded into a dazzling fluorescent display across the sky, and the Teng snake in the milky white halo transformed back into Atticus's body. He appeared intact, but his face bore the marks of deep fatigue, as if he hadn't rested for several nights. "Failed again," he murmured, gazing at the fluorescent light. As the unstable magic nodes dissipated, Atticus Blaine observed the fading glow with a thoughtful expression. Once the scattered fluorescent light had completely vanished, he realized that the vampire ancestor had disappeared as well. With a sudden lift of his eyelids, he remarked, "Oh, I forgot to ask its name." End of this chapter.